Chapter 485. Enter the Supreme Palace Enclosure? After hearing these words, even though Tobague had a premonition in his heart, he couldn't help but feel a little dizzy at this moment. Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan was really frank and straightforward, not hiding the thoughts in the depths of his heart at all. Was he tempted? Of course he was. So even though Tobague was not the head of the Tuoba family, he subconsciously stood from the perspective of the head of the family and began to seriously consider Yuhuan Tianzuan's proposal. But unfortunately, such an important decision wasn't something that Tobague could easily make. Therefore, after pondering for a while, he couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva, and then nervously replied, reporting to Senior. This is a serious matter. Junior's words carry little weight and my weight in the family is limited. Please forgive me for not being able to give you an immediate answer. How about this? Junior will immediately set off to return to the Supreme Palace enclosure and report this matter to the head of the family. If the head of the family has this intention, then Junior will ask him to personally come and discuss the details with you. What does Senior think? Tobague was indeed tempted, but he wasn't stupid. With Heaven Capital's background, why would they need to rely on others and even take the initiative to propose an alliance with the Tuoba family? Could it be that Heaven Capital needed the protection of the Tuoba family to gain a foothold in the Supreme Palace enclosure? How was that possible? Divine generals, star lords, and even the 7 Empyreans. Although the world was big, where couldn't one call home? Therefore, Yuhuan Tianzuan wasn't trying to form an alliance with the Tuoba family at all, but to divert the Tuoba family and even the entire Supreme Palace enclosure's influence to oppose the master of the W ruins. Heaven Capital's strength was already terrifying. Then, how terrifying was the great figure that imprisoned them? This great figure should be the true master of the W ruins, right? Seeking luck and avoiding disaster was everyone's nature. Therefore, after thinking about it several times, Tobague finally decided to stay out of it. So even if Yuhuan Tianzuan used Heaven Capital as a bargaining chip, Tobague didn't dare to easily get involved. Tobague tried to be perfunctory. But how could Yuhuan Tianzuan be so easily fooled? Thus, after seeing the hesitation on Tobague's face, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately gave him a strong dose of medicine. Tobague was so frightened that he nearly broke free from his shackles. Go back and report to the Patriarch. If this old man is not wrong with your aptitude, it will probably take you another 300 to 500 years to successfully advance to the Celestial Venerable Realm. Since that's the case, let's make a deal. As long as you agree to this old man's request, this old man can guarantee that you will become a Heavenly Venerable within 60 years. What do you think? After hearing these words, Tobague was thoroughly shocked. Yuhuan Tianzuan's words were tactful enough. In reality, how could he not know how capable he was? Not to mention 300 to 500 years, even if he spent his entire life with his talent, he might not be able to successfully advance to Empyrean. Therefore, after hearing Yuhuan Tianzuan promise that he could successfully advance to Empyrean within 60 years, Tobague's heart was finally moved. I don't know what Senior's request is. If it is not beyond the scope of this junior's ability, this junior can give it a try. Hearing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan's face suddenly revealed a satisfied smile. Don't worry, I won't embarrass you. As long as you agree to this old man's request. This old man can even make a heart demon oath here, guaranteeing that I will fulfill my promise in the future. So, can we talk openly and honestly now? After a detailed discussion, Tobague and Yuhuan Tianzuan finally reached a consensus. Yuhuan Tianzuan's request was very simple. That was, Tobague would send out death warriors to wreak havoc on Earth in order to contain Qinshi. At the same time, Yuhuan Tianzuan would gather everyone's strength and take advantage of this opportunity to break the seal of the Great Array. As long as the Great Array was broken, the remnants of Jianghu would immediately board the giant ship and leave the W ruins with Tobague. Wasn't the plan simple? Whether this seemingly simple plan could be carried out smoothly or not, in fact, it would depend on how much Yuhuan Tianzuan knew about Qinshi. Qinshi was indeed a supreme. But he was not an omniscient and omnipotent god. As long as Tobague followed the plan and simultaneously launched a destructive attack on Earth from all directions, then, would Qinshi rush over to stop them from breaking the array as soon as possible? Or would he rush over to deal with those ants that dared to cause trouble in his territory? For Yuhuan Tianzuan, the ancient immortal cultivators represented by Jianghu were obviously the true masters of Earth. Therefore, the Homo evolutus living on Earth were nothing more than ants to him. If it wasn't for Qinshi stopping him in time, causing him to fail in building the Soul Bridge, then Jianghu should have successfully descended to Earth by now. Once Jianghu succeeded in descending, what followed would inevitably be a massacre that would sweep across the globe. Dynasties would change, rivers and mountains would change masters. A new regime would always be built on the corpses of countless people. With Yuhuan Tianzuan's understanding of Qin Shi, he could basically be sure that, once Earth was threatened, Qin Shi would inevitably solve it as soon as possible. Then they could use this opportunity to break the seal and fly freely in the sky. Yuhuan Tianzuan used the entire Tiandu as a bargaining chip and the Empyrean realm as bait. Not only did he satisfy the collective interests of the Tuoba family, but he also satisfied Tobague's personal interests. Then, what reason did Tobague have not to take the risk? Take a gamble and turn a bicycle into a motorcycle. Take a gamble and turn yellow soil into gold. Under Tobague's command, all the death warriors he brought with him were dispatched. In order to ensure the success of the plan, Tobague gave all his magic weapons to these death warriors, hoping that they could delay Qin Shi for a while. Tuoba Xiu didn't know what agreement her father and Yuhuan Tianzuan had reached. However, when she saw those small star carts, each carrying 3 to 5 men of sacrifice, she faintly had a bad premonition in her heart. "Father, what are you doing?" Tuoba Xiu wanted to know the details. But what she didn't expect was, her father, who had always been very gentle to her, seemed to have changed at this moment. Not only did he not answer her question, but he impatiently locked her in the cabin. "Father? What's wrong with you? Let me out." Tuoba Xiu struggled with all her might. But the cabin door had been set up by Tobague, so she couldn't go out at all. Seeing that Tobague didn't respond for a long time, Tuoba Xiu finally gave up this futile struggle. Then she silently went to a porthole and looked at the blue planet not far away through the porthole. She stared at the planet in a daze. Suddenly, a strong true essence fluctuation that made one's heart palpitate suddenly surged out from the side. Tuoba Xiu quickly looked down and saw a group of people led by Yuhuan Tianzuan floating at the edge of the array, attacking it with all their strength. Their plan, it began. Chapter 486. Tobague had brought a total of 200 death warriors with him, but unfortunately, the average cultivation of these death warriors wasn't high. Besides a few golden cores, most of them were at the foundation establishment stage. Therefore, in addition to these death warriors, Tobague had to sacrifice most of his followers in order to ensure the smooth progress of the plan. Although most of these followers were from the side branches of the Tuoba family, they were still considered to be from the same branch as Tobague. Some of them even called him grandfather. It was precisely because of this that when Tobague made this decision, his heart was actually dripping blood. This was the so-called success of a general was built on the bones of 10,000. In the face of absolute benefits, the only thing Tobague could do was silently make a promise in his heart. He promised that he would treat the family of these followers well in the future. This was an unavoidable sacrifice for the sake of a great cause. Tobague believed that, once the plan succeeded as a party to this transaction, he would obtain an unimaginable interest. In fact, as long as he could smoothly become an Empyrean, then with the support of Yuhuan Tianzuan, Tobague could even choose to establish his own family and become a rising power comparable to the Tuoba family. In order to lure Tobague into the trap, Yuhuan Tianzuan had even directly made a heart demon oath in front of him. In the face of such generous transaction conditions and such an honest transaction partner, how could Tobague not be moved? Of course there were risks. Since he chose to stand on Yuhuan Tianzuan's side, it meant that he would inevitably become a thorn in the side of the master of the Dubhe ruins. Once the plan failed, Tobague didn't need to think to know how miserable his fate would be. Even so, Tobague chose to stand on the side of benefits. Only children could distinguish between right and wrong. Adults only looked at benefits. In the face of absolute benefits, some people could even betray their own flesh and blood, let alone distant relatives 3 or 5 generations away. Therefore, the Tuoba family's action team set out according to plan. In order to delay as much time as possible, Tobague ordered 3 people to form a group. Each group would drive a small star car to ensure that when they were intercepted, they wouldn't be shot down by the other side. These small star cars weren't high grade, so they didn't have the ability to jump through space. However, even at full speed, his speed was still comparable to that of a Yuanian cultivator. Thus, not long after these over 100 teams set out, Tobague received a reply from each team. The various groups were already in position. They were only waiting for Tobague's order. Then, these warriors from Supreme Palace enclosure would immediately enter the atmosphere, setting off a storm of blood and dismembered limbs. Tobague turned to look at the moon not too far away. After quickly communicating with Yuhuan Tianzuan through divine sense, he gritted his teeth and transmitted his voice to the other teams in a voice that was close to a roar: "Kill! Kill! Kill! Kill!" As the battle cries rang out one after another, the Xingcha ships rushed towards the land below at the fastest speed as if they were racing a dragon boat. In an instant, 100 barges strive against the current, the one who strives first. 1,000 sails are launched and the one who advances bravely wins. Perhaps this could also be considered a war. The soldiers did not need to think about how this war started, nor did they need to think about what role they played in this war. They only needed to do one thing, and that was, according to Tabague's instructions, they would launch an inhumane massacre of all life on this planet. The first to be attacked was not the United States with powerful armaments but Wuxia. Because the Western Earth's altitude was higher, and Mount Everest was nearby, a Xingcha ship landed along Mount Everest and soon arrived at Shigatse. Just like the song, "My hometown in Shigatse: the blue sky is filled with white clouds, and the beautiful river is filled with green waves. An eagle flies by here, leaving behind a moving song." It was the pearl of the plateau and was also known as the most beautiful manor. But on this day this beautiful manor was destined to be baptized by war and completely turned into scorched ruins. The person in charge of this Xingcha ship was Tabague's most capable follower, Tuoba Hong. In modern terms, although Tuoba Hong also had the blood of the Tuoba family, he had long been out of the family, so he could not be regarded as the blood of the Tuoba family. Naturally, he did not have the qualifications to worship the ancestors of the Tuoba family. Here was what needed to be mentioned. Whether it was the Tuoba family, the Shenyuan family, or the Dongfang family, there were too many people like Tuoba Hong. Their birth status was far lower than the average Tuoba family member, so they needed to work harder than most people and even risk their lives. As long as they could get the approval of the family, then they could marry a direct woman of the Tuoba family, and through this way of marriage they could consolidate and improve their status in the family. And this was the common promotion mechanism in big families. Even Tabague wanted to climb up, so how could Tuoba Hong, who was at the bottom of the family, not want to climb up? Therefore, after Tuoba Hong received the order from Tabague, he was more excited than anyone else. It was like soldiers only cared about when the military pay was paid. In Tuoba Hong's eyes this was not a war at all, but a great thing for him to get credit for. Since Tabague had clearly stated that he wanted to kill everyone on this planet, then he would kill. The more he killed, the better. Tuoba Hong came to the sky above Shigatse, and after glancing at the city below, he could not help but show a satisfied smile. "This is it, let's start." His tone was calm, but the expression on his face was particularly excited. After seeing his two companions nodding in response, Tuoba Hong could no longer hold back the excitement in his heart, and directly stood on the bow of the ship and made a gesture. 5-element spell, Raging Inferno. This spell was temporarily taught to everyone by Tabague. After all, compared to the 4 elements of metal, wood, water, and earth, the fire element spell was obviously stronger in terms of destructive power. And with Tuoba Hong's brazen move, a flame comparable to the scorching sun appeared over the city out of thin air. The area of the flame was as big as a basketball court. Before it fell to the ground, a heat wave swept over the city. "Fire! Fire! Put out the fire!" The flame hit an apartment building, and the fire instantly engulfed the entire building. The sudden fire seemed to have alarmed the entire city. People rushed to the streets and looked up blankly in the direction of the rising smoke. But just when everyone looked up to watch the fun, one after another, huge flames, like flints thrown by ancient catapults, crazily smashed into the center of the city in front of everyone. Why did flames suddenly fall from the sky? Was this a natural disaster? Or was it the wrath of God? No one knew the reason, just as no one could see Tuoba Hong in the sky. The devout believers immediately knelt on the ground, wailing and begging Buddha for forgiveness. But they didn't even have time to complete the ritual, and their bodies had been completely engulfed by the fire. Cool. So cool. Let's go to the next place. Tuoba Hong laughed and glanced at the city below, then directly called his companions and left. No way, this planet was too big. They had few people, so naturally, it was impossible to really kill them all. So after a fire hurriedly burned Shigatse, Tuoba Hong immediately turned the bow and sailed all the way to India according to the previously established route. And this was the action plan drawn up by Tabague in order to contain Qinshi. Wherever Xingcha passed, it would become a purgatory of fire in the world. Chapter 487. One after another, Xingcha landed all over the world. While Taoba Hong was burning Shigatse, the rest of the teams also launched an attack on the cities below. From the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere, from Asia to Africa. From Wuxia to the United States, from Shergaze to Kathmandu, any city with a large population was bound to become the priority target of Tao Bahong and his team. Everything was as Yu Huan Tianzuan said, the indigenous people on this planet were too weak. If it weren't for Qin Shi who came out of nowhere, the earth would have long become Tiandu's new home. In order to successfully persuade Taoba Gue, Yu Huan Tianzuan provided the Shadow Stone they had left when they fought with Qin Shi in the outside world. The Shadow Stone recorded the entire process of the fight between the two sides in detail. And this was obviously what really moved Taoba Gue. Qin Shi fought with Tiandu twice. The first time ended with the mysterious woman's rescue, and the second time ended with Yu Huan Tianzuan opening the Sun-Moon Star Array. With Yu Huan Tianzuan's character, how could he honestly give both Shadow Stones to Taoba Gue? Compared with Tiandu, Qin Shi's biggest disadvantage was not strength, but influence. Although Qin Shi's personal strength was strong, he was only one person after all, not a large organization with many eyes and ears and followers. He came alone. He also went alone. Even if he could block millions of lions with one sword, it was still difficult to resist the treachery behind his back. Everything was going according to plan. Therefore, at the same time that Tao Bahong and his team launched the attack, Yu Huan Tianzuan on the moon also began their operation to break the array. With the 7 Sky Lords as the leader, the Divine Generals and Star Lords as the assistants. With all their strength they broke through this array. When the surging true essence collided with the array, Qin Shi finally noticed the strangeness. At this moment he was accompanying the little guy in the yard to find the sense of qi, and teaching the little guy how to draw qi into the body and refine the essence into qi. The sudden change suddenly made Qin Shi slightly absent-minded. However, Qin Shi didn't even have time to figure out the reason carefully. The little guy's slightly puzzled voice suddenly sounded in his ear. "Dad, look there. What is that? Is the sun falling?" Hearing this, Qin Shi quickly raised his head and looked in the direction the little guy was pointing, but he saw that in the sky thousands of meters high, a huge flame appeared out of thin air. Looking from a distance, the flame was like the sun, smashing towards Shangjing City at an extremely fast speed. Seeing this, Qin couldn't help but be startled. But soon after, a burst of uncontrollable anger suddenly rose in his heart. You're courting death." Since the seal had been touched, it meant that Yu Huan Tianzuan was forcefully breaking through the formation, so Qin Shi obviously did not take the sudden appearance of the fire in front of him to heart. With a ruthless howl, a long sword formed from true essence appeared out of thin air above the courtyard. Then, like a meteor, the long sword instantly cut through the sky and shot straight towards the ball of flames. Bam! With a muffled sound, the ball of flames completely turned into a cloud of white smoke and dissipated. Fortunately, it was afternoon and the sun was shining brightly in the sky, so not many people noticed the abnormality just now. "Nian, wait for me here obediently. Daddy will be right back." Just as Yu Huan Tianzuan had guessed, Qin Shi's first reaction was to rush to the moon to settle the score with him. However, as he soared into the sky and spread out his divine sense, Qin Shi suddenly discovered there were signs of true essence fluctuations in the air. Qin Shi followed these fluctuations all the way and almost instantly came to the front of one of the Xingxia. "Who are you? Why are you making trouble here?" After using true essence to forcibly stop the Xingxia, Qin Shi frowned and looked at the 3 people on the ship. Seeing this, the 3 men of sacrifice on the ship did not even bat an eyelid and directly launched the fiercest attack towards him. Courting death. These men of sacrifice were only at the gold core stage. In front of Qin Shi they were not even ants. The current situation was urgent. Yu Huan Tianzuan was still breaking the formation, so Qin Shi did not have time to play the game of torture with them. So, he directly used a secret method on the 3 people on the ship. Soul snatching. Later, Qin Shi finally understood everything. Although these men of sacrifice were brainwashed every once in a while, they still clearly remembered the last order given by Tabagwe, that was, kill. Wherever they go, kill without mercy. Since Qin Shi knew the cause and effect, there were only 2 choices in front of him. Either he immediately rushed to the moon and beheaded Tiandu on the spot, or he immediately rushed to all parts of the world to stop the killing of the Tuoba family's men of sacrifice. If he chose the former, then with the lethality of immortal cultivators to ordinary people, it was estimated that before Qin Shi succeeded in defeating the 7 Sky Lords, human beings would be declared extinct first. What a vicious plan. What a vicious heart. Yu Huan Tianzuan was determined that he would not leave the earth alone. This was the angriest day in Qin Shi's life. On one hand, it was because Yuhuan Tianzuan's behavior really touched his bottom line. On the other hand, it was completely because he was annoyed with his own inaction. Knowing that the 9-star alignment meant the opening of the seal, he did not make any defensive preparations in advance. The reason was very simple. Because Qin Shi had always prided himself as an ordinary person. So from the moment of his return he only wanted to be like an ordinary person, to have an ordinary and happy family, to live an ordinary and happy life. Qin Shi had truly achieved a small recluse in the wild and a large recluse in the city. But it was precisely because of this, he was found an opportunity by Yuhuan Tianzuan and successfully exploited such a big loophole. Thinking of this, Qin Shi couldn't wait to rush to the moon immediately and tear Yuhuan Tianzuan into pieces with his own hands. But the current situation forced him to stay on Earth. After all, if he delayed here for a second, another city might become a sea of fire. In the face of those ruthless immortal cultivators, what could the poor human beings do to resist? In desperation, Qin Shi had to look up in the direction of the moon, and fiercely gritted his teeth and directly made his heart demon oath. Yuhuan Tianzuan, what a good Yuhuan Tianzuan. Don't you like to make a heart demon oath? Then I, Qin Shi, will also make a heart demon oath today. If I don't kill you in this life, I swear that I am not human. His mouth contained the heavenly law and his words were law. If there was any disobedience, there would be no hope for the heavenly law in this life. Chapter 488. It was broad daylight and the universe was clear and bright. After Qin Shi made the heart demon oath, the clothes on his body suddenly puffed up. Subsequently, a surge of incomparably surging true essence, like a huge tide, suddenly spread out with Qin Shi's body as the center. They saw, he stood alone above the 9 heavens. His sleeves fluttered in the wind, making flapping sounds. When the divine sword Dharma idol condensed and took shape, Qin Shi grabbed the sword hilt and took 7 steps in the air. After 7 steps, he suddenly pointed the long sword in his hand to the sky. At the same time, he shouted with a fierce expression, "Rise!" In an instant, tens of thousands of divine sword Dharma idols connected and formed beside him. When he raised his sword, tens of thousands of swords suddenly arrived. I'd like to see, who on earth dares to behave atrociously in my territory? Before his voice fell, Qin Shi's entire person had completely turned into a stream of light, directly disappearing in midair. The densely packed divine sword Dharma idols followed closely behind Qin Shi. From afar, the long swords in the sky were like giant dragons dancing in the air. They bared their fangs and brandished their claws as they pounced on any enemy they encountered along the way. Following the signs of vital essence fluctuations, Qin Shi killed all the way from North China to South China, and then from East China to West China. At that moment he was the last guardian of this divine land. Under the absolute suppression of the realm, the men of sacrifice of the Tuoba family could not even see Qin Shi's appearance clearly. One after another, the long swords directly pierced through their bodies. At the same time, they destroyed the Xingqia that they relied on to survive. Qin Shi's speed was already fast enough, but there were still many cities that had completely turned into a sea of fire. Time was tight, and Qin Shi did not even have time to participate in the rescue operation of each city. Therefore he could only hurriedly cause a storm over these cities. Then he turned around and ran to the next target. Although the men of sacrifice of the Tuoba family were weak, they relied on their numbers and were scattered in every corner of the world. They acted almost at the same time. Therefore, by the time Qin Shi had completely wiped out the men of sacrifice in Wuxia, nearly 2 minutes had passed. This was simply a time race. Now it was time to see who could reach the finish line first. At this time, far away near the moon, Tobagwe was also aware of the situation on Earth. Tobagwe had a magic tool in his hands. Through this magic tool, he could immediately know the situation of each follower. It had to be known that Tobagwe had sent out a total of 435 followers for this trip. After sending all these people out, there were only 15 people left, including Tuoba Shio. Tobagwe had truly gone all out this time. But he never would have thought, from the moment these people set off to the moment they fell, the time it took to brew a cup of tea had not even passed. In such a short period of time, nearly 100 of his followers had perished. At this rate, it was estimated that the owner of the ruins, whom he had never met before, would kill his way to the moon in less than 30 minutes. Thus, when Tobagwe learned of this, the excitement on his face immediately turned into endless anxiety. It was too fast. These people had died too fast. In the shadow stone that Yuhuan Tianzuan had given to Tobagwe, Qin Shi's cultivation was only at the peak of soul formation. But with this speed, how could an Empyrean achieve it? From the beginning to the end, Tobagwe did not know what realm the enemy he was facing was at. Yuhuan Tianzuan had lied to him, saying that Qin Shi was only a gatekeeper and that the pure sky saint ancestor was the culprit behind the imprisonment of Tiandu. For this reason, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not hesitate to make a heart demon oath to deceive Tobagwe. Tobagwe believed it. So he stood on Yuhuan Tianzuan's side. But now that things had come to this, it was useless to say so much. He could only blame himself for being greedy. He did not go to Earth to investigate in advance and listen to Yuhuan Tianzuan's side of the story. So even if Tobagwe regretted at this moment that he should not have believed Yuhuan Tianzuan's bewitchment, he had no choice but to release the arrow. Hurry! Hurry! He's going to kill us. Tobagwe stood at the bow of the ship and shouted crazily. While he was extremely anxious, how could Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan not be extremely nervous as well? Both sides were competing for time. Tobagwe had done everything he could. If he could not break through the array now, when Qin Shi was free, how would Tiandu deal with his anger? So Yuhuan Tianzuan's heart was not as relaxed as Tobagwe's. Under his command, after the Tiandu people failed to break through the array for the third time, Yuhuan Tianzuan finally could not help but look up to the sky and roar. Then he threw out the jade disc glass cup in his hand. The jade disc glass cup was a top treasure left behind by the pure sky saint ancestor. After Yuhuan Tianzuan ascended to the position of Empyrean, he used his own blood essence to refine this magic treasure. So, this magic treasure had long been related to his life. In the past, Yuhuan Tianzuan would never have been willing to detonate this rare treasure. But at this time he had no other choice. Therefore, after throwing out the jade disc glass cup in his hand, Yuhuan Tianzuan directly formed a seal. Bang! The moment the jade disc glass cup hit the array, the entire moon seemed to tremble. This supreme magic treasure that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years finally completed its final mission at this moment. From now on, the name of the three lanterns of heaven, earth and man would only exist in legends. Under Yuhuan Tianzuan's unscrupulous attack, the array suddenly collapsed, turning into a burst of smoke and dissipating. Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan forcefully endured the impact to his divine soul from detonating his natal magic treasure. He turned around to look at the divine generals and star venerables behind him before abruptly swinging his sleeves and ordering everyone, "Let's go!" Then, with Yuhuan Tianzuan as the leader, the remnants of Tiandu rushed to the giant ship that carried their future. At the same time, Qin Shi, who was on Earth, also sensed everything. The moment the array was destroyed, he instinctively wanted to chase after them and stop them. But the raging fire in the city below made him stop in his tracks. Although he was confident that he could stop Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan's group, it was possible that those damned bastards would burn down another populous city. How to make a choice had really become a big problem. Qin Shi was really hesitant. But at this moment, a voice that was not inferior to the sound of nature suddenly rang in his ears. "Mr. Qin, I'm here to help you." Hearing this, Qin Shi quickly looked back. He saw that Jiang Yen was hurrying in his direction with 300 divine generals from Daiyu Island. The strength of Daiyu Island was not bad. Not only were they all golden core cultivators, but there were also many Yuanying among them. Therefore, as soon as Jiang Yen and his people appeared, Qin Shi could not help but smile. "Good that you're here. I owe you today and I'll repay you in the future." Hearing Qin Shi's words, this cunning old man could not help but laugh. "Sir, you don't have to do this. The divine land gave birth to us. Now that our homeland is in danger, how can we stand by and do nothing?" At this point, Jiang Yen suddenly changed the topic and asked in a probing tone, "Sir, you seem to have something urgent to deal with? Why don't you leave this to us first? Those bastards are just divine generals, why do you need to do it yourself?" "Then I'll leave this to you. I'll be right back." Before her voice fell, Qin Shi's entire person had already completely turned into a stream of light, instantly disappearing before Jiang Yan's eyes. Seeing this, Jiang Yan could not help but smile faintly. He looked at the sky thoughtfully, then waved his sleeves gently and calmly ordered the people behind him, "Go, hurry up." "Yes." Chapter 489. Yuhuan Tianzuan used the glass cup as the price and finally succeeded in breaking the array. At that moment, the most excited one was not Yuhuan Tianzuan, but Tobagwe, who had been waiting anxiously. "Quick, quick, quick." Tobagwe stood at the bow of the ship and kept waving to everyone. In fact, at this time, why would he need to urge them? After the formation was broken, with Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan in the lead, the remaining several thousand people in Tiandu rushed toward the enormous star Cha in a grandiose manner. This was the third time Tiandu had to move. For the arrogant divine generals and star monarchs, when had they ever been in such a sorry state? Therefore, after everyone boarded the ship, they each found a corner and waited silently for the starship to start. The morale was a little low. But thinking about it, it was understandable. After all, Qin was like a dark cloud hanging over everyone's head. As long as they didn't escape from his clutches, this dark cloud would continue to bring endless trouble to people. Venerable, is everyone here? After Yuhuan Tianzuan boarded the ship, Tobague immediately put on a warm smile. Looking at his current flattering appearance, where was the calmness when bargaining with Yuhuan Tianzuan? Instead, he was more like a waiter in a tea house. This was the reality. It must be known that the sealed Yuhuan Tianzuan and the freed Yuhuan Tianzuan were two completely different concepts. Tobague was very smart, and of course he was also very sensible. Since Yuhuan Tianzuan had been freed, then the resentment that made him angry should naturally all turn into clouds and dissipate with the wind. So, Tobague instantly adjusted his mentality. From now on, his fate would be closely related to Yuhuan Tianzuan in front of him, and Emperor Yuhuan seemed to be very satisfied with Tobague's change from arrogance to respect. He nodded gently, and after looking thoughtfully at the blue planet in the distance, he directly ordered to Tobague, "There's no time to lose, let's go." Yes. After receiving Yuhuan Tianzuan's order, Tobague immediately rushed to the rudder, and then directly inserted the high-grade spirit stone that he had prepared in advance. With the continuous influx of spirit energy, the huge starship suddenly trembled slightly. Tobague turned the rudder, adjusted the direction, and shouted to everyone, "We are about to set sail, please sit tight." At that moment, Tobague was like Columbus returning from a rewarding journey. Although he had lost hundreds of loyal followers, compared to the harvest of this trip, what was that loss? As long as he successfully brought Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others back to Supreme Palace enclosure, then he would be the greatest meritorious service. What kind of impact would this have on the current situation of the Supreme Palace enclosure? Thinking of this, he couldn't help himself. But what Tobague didn't. Just as he gripped the rudder and was about to set off, a terrifying pressure that caused one's heart to palpitate suddenly came from afar. The strength of this pressure was enough to make one's legs go soft. What's more, there was obviously a monstrous killing intent. What's going on? Tobague was startled by this killing intent that seemed to have materialized into reality. After reacting, he wanted to control the starship enclosure to directly perform a space jump. But unfortunately, before the starship enclosure could perform a space jump, it must be in a high-speed flying state, so Tobague could only push the starship enclosure with all his strength, hoping to escape from this terrible place as soon as possible. The starship enclosure needed to be accelerated before it could perform a space jump, but Qin, who had already mastered the true meaning of the word void, didn't need to. Therefore, after a few breaths of time, his figure had already appeared not far behind the starship enclosure, and was clearly reflected in the eyes of everyone on the ship. In everyone's sight, Qin arrived suddenly on 10,000 swords, like a soaring dragon roaming in the void, like the Milky Way hanging upside down on 3 stone beams. Before he arrived, the strong and unparalleled pressure on his body had already pressed everyone to the point of suffocation. At that moment, a nightmare seemed to have become a reality. "Everyone listen to my order, array." Unlike Tobague, who was at a loss, Yuhuan Tianzuan was obviously mentally prepared to be caught up by Qin in advance. Therefore, as soon as Qin appeared, everyone on the ship launched an attack at him at the same time. In an instant, a dense amount of true yuan qi shot out like laser cannons, bringing along a dazzling stream of light as it smashed towards Qin. Whether it was a Star Lord or a divine general, everyone couldn't wait to use all their skills in an instant, only hoping that everyone could work together to strangle this terrible enemy here. In the face of so many people attacking at the same time, even Qin didn't dare to face them head-on. Therefore, his figure flashed and suddenly disappeared from everyone's sight. Where is he? Where did he go? The killing move that everyone on the ship had been preparing for a long time missed just like that. No one knew where Qin had gone, so they subconsciously turned their heads to look for her. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately raised his arms and shouted, "Don't panic. Be careful. Don't let down your guard. Although this person's cultivation is high, we have many people in Tiandu. He definitely won't dare to fight us head-on, so he can only hide in the dark and wait for an opportunity to sneak attack, trying to defeat us one by one. Everyone, don't be distracted, don't fall into his tricks." After Yuhuan Tianzuan said this, everyone calmed down, so they released their divine sense, hoping to find Qin Shi's trace in the first place. At this time, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly turned around and asked Tobague anxiously, "How long will it take?" 3 breaths. Only 3 breaths. Note, 1 breath is about 2 to 3 seconds. Tobague gave a very positive reply. Xingqia had been accelerating. As long as she successfully accelerated to the state of space jump, then even if Qin Shi was a supreme, he wouldn't be able to attack them in this state. In fact, from the moment he saw Tobague, Yuhuan Tianzuan had already made various plans in his heart. According to Tobague's description, there should be many supreme-level existences in Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, if Qin Shi was really determined to pursue and beat them up today, Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan would at most drag the battlefield to Supreme Palace enclosure. He didn't believe that no one could stop Qin Shi. Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan had calculated everything, but the only thing he hadn't expected was, in order to kill him, Qin Shi didn't even hesitate to make a heart demon oath. Therefore, the moment he talked to Tobague, Qin Shi's figure appeared from the void. This was the anger from Wuxia's bloodline. Of all the things Emperor Yuhuan shouldn't have done, the thing he shouldn't have done the most was to treat the lives of mortals as grass. Thus, he had to die. The moment Qin Shi appeared, the long sword in his hand drew a cold light in the air. Moonlight Sword Art, 3rd Style, 10,000 Swords Return to Origin. Qin Shi's appearance was very sudden. Besides Yuhuan Tianzuan, who was closest to him, almost no one reacted. Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan instinctively wanted to block it. But what he never thought was, Qin Shi's sword tip didn't point directly at him, but at the side, to Tobague. Chapter 490. First of all, Xingqia could barely be regarded as a magic weapon. Especially this kind of large Xingqia, it needed the master's blood essence to feed it. After it was completely refined, it could be controlled at will. Therefore, the first thing Qin Shi wanted to kill was not Yuhuan Tianzuan but Tobague. In addition, there was also an analogy here. If Qin Shi was compared to a tiger, then Tiandu's group was naturally a flock of sheep. In terms of individual combat strength, a sheep could never be a tiger's opponent. But if thousands of sheep charged at the same time, even a ferocious tiger would have to obediently retreat to the side. The strength of an individual could never be compared to the strength of a group. Therefore, Qin Shi could only use a sneak attack to drag the sheep out of the flock one by one, and then kill them one by one. From the beginning, Qin Shi's goal was very clear. So, as soon as he appeared, he perfectly displayed the strength of a supreme being. Moonlight Sword Art, 3rd move, 10,000 Swords Return to Origin. The long sword behind Qin Shi was like a giant dragon. After emerging from the void, it smashed down at Tobague at an extremely fast speed. Its speed was fast and its momentum was spectacular. It was like a waterfall that swallowed mountains and rivers. In an instant, it brought a huge suffocating pressure to everyone present. Tobague was in the center of the vortex. His feeling was naturally more profound than others. And it was precisely because of this. As soon as Qin Shi appeared, Tobague keenly felt that he was locked on by Qin Shi's aura. So, he immediately raised all the vital essence in his body and forcibly propped up a protective aura shield. At the same time, he did not forget to urgently send a voice transmission to Yuhuan Tianzuan, "Venerable, save me." At this moment, Tobague really regretted it. Qin Shi did not care about Emperor Yuhuan and instead made a special trip to find trouble with him, a small fry. Wasn't it obvious that he wanted to kill him, then seize control of the Xingqia, and finally slowly kill everyone on the ship? And at this time, if Tobague still didn't know Qin Shi's true strength, then he really would be too stupid. Supreme Martial Artist. This was a living supreme being. He was in big trouble today. In just a flash, tens of thousands of swords smashed into Tobague's protective astral shield. He didn't even have time to react before he spat out a large mouthful of blood from the shockwave of the true qi. Poof! His protective shield shattered with the sound. Tobague's eyes flashed with despair. A mirthless smile suddenly appeared on his face. Just what did he, Tobague, deserve to die under the sovereign sword today? Thinking about it carefully, this seemed to be a kind of honor. Humans would always have some different feelings before they died. Tobague had already mentally prepared himself. But at this critical juncture, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him and risked his life to block this fatal blow for him. Of course, this person couldn't be Tuoba Xiu. Moreover, Tuoba Xiu didn't have such ability. Therefore, when this person risked his life to block this blow for Tobague, even Qin Shi couldn't help but show a trace of surprise. At that moment, time seemed to stand still. The focus of the audience was on this figure. This person, wasn't it Yuhuan Tianzuan? No one could smoothly block the full blow of a supreme martial artist. Yuhuan Tianzuan was no exception. Therefore, the moment the tens of thousands of swords arrived, the energy around Yuhuan Tianzuan's body suddenly stagnated. The protective shield also cracked and collapsed. In front of an insightful Void Realm expert, a Divine Transformation Realm expert had no ability to resist. But even so, Yuhuan Tianzuan had no intention of retreating. He looked up to the sky and roared. The defensive magic weapon on his body suddenly bloomed with a burst of brilliant light. Even if a supreme martial artist is above, I will not retreat half a step. In an instant, the body of the 10 celestial sovereigns who had been in a high position for a long time, burst out with a tenacious fighting spirit that didn't fear death. Bang, bang, bang. 10,000 swords returned to origin was very different from other moves. This move's sword chi was vigorous and long. After the move was released, it was like a huge wave. Wave after wave bombarded the enemy's body continuously until the attack was completely eliminated. Under such a violent collision, the people on the ship naturally reacted at this moment. Then they spontaneously attacked Qinshi. Seeing that things were not going well, Qinshi could only hurriedly withdraw his true essence and then escape into the void again. This was the method of an insightful emptiness. His movements were erratic and formless, making it impossible for others to detect his presence. When Qinshi disappeared like this, the people no longer attacked randomly. Instead, they rushed forward like a swarm of bees and hurriedly protected Yuhuan Tianzuan in the center. Seeing that Yuhuan Tianzuan's situation was not very good, Celestial Sovereign Xuanzhen immediately stepped forward to support him. Then he asked with concern, "Yuhuan, are you okay?" "I'm fine." Yuhuan Tianzuan clearly suffered a heavy blow from Qinshi, but at this moment, it was as if nothing had happened. Other than his pale face, Celestial Sovereign Xuanzhen could not see any injuries on his body. Celestial Sovereign Xuanzhen seemed to want to ask something. However, Yuhuan Tianzuan directly waved his hand and quickly ordered the people, "Formation! The crisis is not over yet. Don't be distracted." As expected. Before Yuhuan Tianzuan's voice died away, Qinshi's figure once again appeared in front of everyone's eyes. He had missed the best opportunity when he missed his attack just now. At present, most of the remaining Heaven Capital troops were concentrated near the rudder. Even Qinshi did not have the confidence to break their formation in an instant. Therefore, he could only move to the stern of the ship and concentrate all his true essence on his hand. This time, he did not use a sword. Instead, he chose a saber that he did not use often. The sword was nimble and the saber was strong and fierce. Great clumsiness turned into simplicity. One saber was enough. The third move of the Flaming Sun Saber technique. One saber cleaving the sky. They saw. The moment Qinshi appeared, he was already holding the saber with both hands. The tip of the saber was pointed at the sky. Such a powerful move, even if it had not been used yet, its power could not be concealed. When Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan sensed the commotion, his expression immediately changed. He shouted fiercely at the crowd, "Quick! Stop him!" Hearing this, everyone turned around wanting to launch a joint attack on Qinshi again. But could their speed be faster than Qinshi? So the moment everyone turned around, Qinshi drew his saber. At that moment, he was like a god descending, proudly standing above all living beings. Man and saber became one. The saber aura suddenly came into being, as if it was going to destroy everything in its path. It made it impossible for people to avoid it. This was the simplest, most direct and also the most unfancy saber. With an unparalleled domineering aura, it slashed towards the incomparably huge Xingqia. Didn't Yuhuan Tianzuan want to ride Xingqia to Supreme Palace enclosure? Since he couldn't kill Tabague, he might as well destroy this ship. As long as Xingqia was destroyed with the flying speed of Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others, when would they be able to fly to Supreme Palace enclosure? The journey to the stars is long and the sky is high. Don't worry, I will play with you slowly. Chapter 491. 3 breaths. It took less than 10 seconds. After Yuhuan Tianzuan sacrificed himself to block Qinshi's attack for Tabague, who had narrowly escaped death, pinned all his hopes on Xingqia. At that moment, Tabague only felt that his mind was blank. Everything in the outside world seemed to have nothing to do with him anymore. The only thing that could attract his attention was this faintly fluorescent high-grade spirit stone in front of him. As long as this high-grade spirit stone in front of him suddenly bloomed, it meant that Xingqia could perform a space jump. 1 breath. 2 breaths. 3 breaths. When Tobagwe exhaled a mouthful of turbid air for the 3rd time, his eyes suddenly burst with a burst of light, and the excitement on his face was even more indescribable. However, what Tobagwe didn't know was, just as he was excited, Qin Shi, who was standing proudly at the stern of the ship, also slashed out with the long saber in his hand. Red Sun Saber Technique's 3rd move, one saber cleaves the sky. This was a saber condensed from the true essence of a Dongshu stage cultivator. Qin Shi hadn't even slashed out, but this saber light was already like a pillar supporting the sky, instantly increasing by hundreds of times. In terms of length, it was even much longer than the huge Xingxia in front of him. "Break for me!" Qin Shi roared, and he finally slashed out with the saber in his hand. This saber light drew a perfect arc in the air at a speed that was difficult to see with the naked eye. It flashed from top to bottom. Its speed was so fast that it made people speechless. The people on the ship didn't even have time to react before the saber light flashed past their eyes. "It's over." Yuhuan Qianzuan watched all this happen, but he was powerless to stop it. But just when he was in despair, a burst of extremely strong light suddenly bloomed in front of Yuhuan Qianzuan's eyes. The light was so dazzling that it was even brighter than the afternoon sun. At that moment, time stood still. It was truly still. Because Xingxia had successfully entered the space jump state. Too late. Qin Shi had always been outside Xingxia's defensive array formation, so when Xingxia performed the space jump, she did not bring him along with her. Therefore, he could only watch as Xingxia turned into a ray of light and disappeared from his sight. The entire world finally quieted down. Qin Shi turned his head to look at Mars, which was not far away from him, and then turned back to look in the direction of Earth. The azure blue planet was still floating there quietly. This scene was very familiar to Qin Shi. Just like the day he returned, this azure planet was also quietly floating there. At that time, Nianyan was only a little over 4 years old. In the blink of an eye, Nianyan was almost 7 years old. That's right, when this spring is over and summer comes again, Nianyan was 7 years old. A second ago, Qin Shi was still busy killing people, but in the next second she suddenly thought of her daughter. Just like that, heavenly venerable Yu Huan and the others slipped away right in front of him. However, he didn't seem to be in a hurry at all. Instead, he was like a lunatic as he floated in space and laughed foolishly. But the good thing was, his gaffe did not last long. After raising his hand and making a flying kiss gesture toward Earth, Qin Shi immediately put away the smile on his face. "Nianyan, wait for me, Dad will be back soon." After saying that, Qin Shi took a deep look at the azure blue planet in front of him, then immediately turned around and followed the law threads left behind by Xingxia. Run. Run to where? So what if he ran to the ends of the earth? He had to keep his word. If he said he would kill your whole family, he would definitely kill your whole family. Otherwise, how could Qin Shi continue to live? Unlike Cheng Hua and Yi Ji, the 2 brats who ran away from home, Tobagwe brought enough high-grade spirit stones on this trip. Therefore, after successfully getting rid of Qin Shi, Tobagwe did not stop for a moment. Every time Xingxia completed a jump, he would immediately replace it with a new high-grade spirit stone. After Xingxia completed the 7th jump, Tobagwe finally breathed a sigh of relief. He turned around and announced to everyone, "Everyone, we are home." Tobagwe probably emphasized the word, home. Naturally, there was no need to explain the meaning behind his words. "We're home?" Hearing this, everyone on the ship could not help but look at each other. Just a second ago, they were still struggling under the shadow of Qin Shi. How did they suddenly reach their destination in the next second? So fast. You don't have to doubt, please look. This is the Supreme Palace enclosure. After saying that, Tobagwe came to the guardrail, then smiled and pointed to a place not far ahead, a continental plate quietly floating in the universe. If the universe was compared to the sea and the earth was compared to a basketball, then this continent was a small sampan in the sea. This was the Supreme Palace enclosure. An existence that seriously violated the common sense of physics. However, its existence also indirectly proved that the ancient people's conjecture was correct. That is, the sky was round and the earth was round. The Supreme Palace enclosure did not have a sea. At the end of the land was the boundless void of the universe. In addition, although the Supreme Palace enclosure was not a planet, it still had a layer of complex cloud structure similar to the atmosphere. Therefore, looking from a distance from Xingxia, it was actually more like a landscape rockery of a rich family. However, the area of this rockery was much larger than the Earth. It was at least twice the size of the Earth. Moreover, it did not have a large area occupied by the sea. The Supreme Palace enclosure has been divided into 9 provinces since ancient times. Shang Han Ning Zhong Lan Wan Yu Yun and Lei. My Tuoba family comes from the northernmost Ning province of the Supreme Palace enclosure. There is a saying, Ning province is in the north, Tuoba town is in the south. It means that my Tuoba family is in the south of Ning province. At such a close distance, it was impossible to use a space jump. Therefore, Tobague took advantage of this time to take the initiative to introduce the general situation of the Supreme Palace enclosure to Yuhuan Tianzuan. And when mentioning the Tuoba family, Tobague's entire state faintly changed. Thinking about it, was this the feeling of finding an organization? Tobague tried to introduce the strength of the Tuoba family to bring a certain amount of pressure to Yuhuan Tianzuan so that Yuhuan Tianzuan would have no choice but to pay attention to him. But what he didn't expect was, even if the Supreme Palace enclosure was close at hand, Yuhuan Tianzuan's attention had not been on him. Instead, he looked back from time to time to look behind Xingxia. Seeing this, Tobague couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. He finally remembered that he was still being chased by a supreme powerhouse. Just now, I deliberately chose the wrong direction to jump back and forth twice. It should be impossible for them to catch up so quickly, right? A reply came from home saying that the patriarch is personally bringing people to support. As long as the patriarch arrives, my little life should be saved, right? Seeing that Yuhuan Tianzuan was not in the mood to talk, Tobague also obediently shut his mouth. At this time, there was a sudden movement from the stern of the ship, so that everyone on the ship was like a bird startled by the twang of a bow. They were so scared that they all put on an attack posture. Kacha. Everyone focused their eyes and saw that the Xingxia was suddenly divided into two. The entire stern of the ship was cut off. It turned out that Qin Shi's saber was not ineffective. It was just that at that time Xingxia had already reached the critical point of the space jump, so even if Xingxia had been cut in half, she still successfully reached the Supreme Palace enclosure. It was a false alarm. It's fine. Tobague was frightened out of his wits. After recovering, he immediately laughed and signaled everyone not to be nervous. If it was destroyed, so be it. Anyway, he was already at this position. Even if he flew slowly, it wouldn't take long to reach his destination. Chapter 492. I'm very puzzled. Why is there more and more rhythm recently? Is it the first day that I started to update every day? If I remember correctly, I've already updated every day for half a year, and there were 4 months in between where I updated every 2 days. Of course, I can understand. Saying that I'm slow is actually a disguised form of urging me to update. Covering face shyly, so I want to thank everyone for their continuous support. Every comment, every monthly vote, every recommendation ticket, every tip you gave me. Actually, I've seen it all and remembered it in my heart. Now, let's talk about the reason for updating every day. My reason is actually very good. Because I want to improve. From the external data, this book seems to be completely dead. But my royalties didn't decrease at all. Because of the channel bonus, if I update one more chapter every day, my monthly income will increase by at least 1 to 20,000. I'm not saying this to show off, but to prove, I'm really not writing books for money. I just want to write better. If it's to make money, then from the day this book was published, my word count skyrocketed. My annual income is at least 500,000 if not 1 million. I need to announce the results here. This book's current average order is 11,000, but the high order has reached 60,000. This 60,000 does not only refer to a single chapter, but it refers to the nearly 30 chapters that started to be published. After that, it began to plummet. 50,000, 40,000, 30,000, 20,000, 10,000, and now more than 1,000. It will probably continue to fall. I'm not writing well. But I did write well before I published it. Actually, I'm not very satisfied with the chapters before I published it. Because at that time I made a lot of rookie mistakes, but I'm too lazy to change them. Then here's the question. Why did I write so well in the beginning but the latter part is so bad? The answer is actually very simple. Because this is my first book that exceeds 1 million words. I can say without reservation, for more than a year I've really put in a lot of effort. But my ability is limited. I've never had any long experience before. At most, I wrote 400,000 words. When I published it, it exceeded this number. So, I've been stumbling along the way. Once half a step to become a god. Now it's completely dead. Can you guess how wonderful the journey of my heart is? I don't blame anyone, I don't even blame myself. Because I'm very clear, I really don't have the ability. My first book was published in 2005 at starting point. During this period he kept writing, but he still couldn't reach the standard of signing a contract. It was only when he wrote this book that he seemed to have had an epiphany and suddenly became famous. So don't compete with me in terms of reading volume, and don't act all high and mighty in front of me. Because I really thought it was ridiculous. Let's not talk about those that we've seen before, for example, the most popular ones recently: Haunted House, Machinist, Best Friend, Best Son-in-Law. Even when the lifestyle game was just released, I could already guess that it had 10,000 subscribers when it only had 80,000 words. But reading a book and writing a book were two different things. He had clearly thought of the plot in his head, but when he wrote it out, the flavor would always change. This was the so-called power of the brush. I had absolutely no control over what I wanted to write. This was also the main reason why many rookies couldn't even sign a contract. All this time I've been thinking about it over and over. Think about how to improve yourself. To be honest, I've improved a lot. After all, he had been writing for so many years. His basic skills were still very solid. Now that he had the experience of 10,000 orders, if he didn't improve, then wouldn't he be a fool? But because the framework of cultivation dad had already been established, I couldn't express it at all. I could only continue writing according to the existing framework. Writing a book was actually like building a house. The foundation of this book was clearly the foundation of a villa, but after I built the foundation, I simply built a straw shed on top of it. Now, I didn't want to live in a straw shed. I wanted to build a villa on top of the straw shed. Then, other than tearing it down and rebuilding it, was there any other way? This was writing a book. Many people would choose to tear down the bridge and rebuild it. I was different. Since I couldn't live in a villa, I would renovate the straw shed. That was my idea. It was such a simple idea that it was somewhat inexplicable. And this was also the fundamental reason why I continued to persevere. Because I had once stood at the top of the mountain, I saw a different scenery. Now I had fallen to the bottom of the valley. But because of that unexpected experience, I couldn't help but look at the top of the mountain. The mountain man asked me, "Do you have hatred in your heart?" I answered, "No hatred." Then he asked, "Why?" At that moment my answer was so firm. "Thank you for letting me see the scenery at the top of the mountain. If I fell, then so be it. I'll just walk again. But the next time, I want to walk more steadily. Slower, more steadily." That was all. March 3, 2019, early morning. The west window opened. Oh right, this isn't a Unix declaration. The sun will rise as usual tomorrow, the west window will be as usual. Mwax, love you guys. Chapter 493. Formation. As soon as he heard these words, Tobague was so scared that he began to tremble. He looked in the direction that Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan was pointing at and saw that a beam of light had appeared diagonally above Xingcha at some point in time. Furthermore, it was rapidly flying in their direction. From a distance, this light was like a meteor. After drawing a beautiful straight line in the sky, it directly smashed in front of everyone. Bang! Before the person arrived, the sword arrived. Sure enough, it was Qin Shi chasing after them again. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not seem to be very surprised. His face turned cold, and then he ordered everyone in a loud voice, "5 divine generals, take your positions. Activate the innate 5-direction flags and set up the heavenly cycle stars formation. Rise." As soon as this order came out, there was a small commotion on the ship. What needed to be mentioned here was, after the Battle of Dragon Head Peak, the 5 divine generals of Tiandu and the Rakshasa Star Lord had lost a lot of people, so Yuhuan Tianzuan could only temporarily choose suitable successors from the existing survivors. These people's strength was not bad, but they had not undergone systematic training, so the moment they heard Yuhuan Tianzuan's order, they seemed a little flustered. To think that our Huang Tiandu, to think that he would end up without a successor, it's really lamentable. Looking at the clumsy positioning of these divine generals and star lords, Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen could not help but sigh. Hearing this, the faces of the 6 heavenly lords, including Yuhuan Tianzuan, flashed with a trace of sadness. Once upon a time, Tiandu was so glorious and strong. But now, the remnants of Tiandu, led by the 10 Directions heavenly lords, had become stray dogs at this moment. In order to avoid Qin Shi's pursuit, they were in a state of panic all day long. When they were still in the solar system, the heavenly lords did not feel that there was anything wrong with escaping to the Supreme Palace enclosure. But when they really came to the Supreme Palace enclosure and saw it floating quietly in the void, the celestial venerables suddenly felt a sense of helplessness from being outlanders. Yes, Earth was their home. It was just like how Tobague's home was in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Now that he had finally returned to the Supreme Palace enclosure, he would naturally be excited. This feeling of desolation was probably the so-called alone as a stranger in a strange land. Morale was low. At this time, Yuhuan Tianzuan seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly asked Tuoba Su, "How long until the reinforcements arrive?" Hearing this, Tobagwe was startled. He didn't seem to understand why Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't ask him directly, but instead asked him secretly. However, doubts were just doubts. Tobagwe honestly replied to Yuhuan Tianzuan with a sound transmission. "The family has already given a clear reply, and the family head is on the way with people. According to my estimation, we'll be able to see the reinforcements in 30 minutes at most." "Good. Then we'll hold on for another incense stick's worth of time." Yuhuan Tianzuan nodded calmly at Tobagwe, then turned around and flew to the side of the high platform. He lowered his head and looked around the audience, then suddenly let out a long roar towards the sky, angrily roaring, "Hateful! Even if we abandon our home and flee to a foreign land, the thief is not willing to let us live. We have been forced into a corner. So I've decided, instead of being trampled on and humiliated like this, it's better to go all out and fight to the death with that evil thief. Yuhuan is here to ask everyone, today, are you willing to fight with me?" As soon as these words came out, the audience boiled over. Before, everyone was busy running for their lives so they couldn't raise any morale. Now that they had come to the Supreme Palace enclosure, this strange place in front of them seemed to give them infinite courage. That's right. They had even lost their home, so what was the use of keeping their lives? Where was the integrity of Tiandu? Where was the glory of Tiandu? After thinking of their last trace of dignity, everyone's fighting spirit was immediately summoned by Yuhuan Tianzuan. Fight! 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 The moment the massive heavenly cycle star formation was set up, a silver-white shield suddenly appeared around Xingcha, protecting her within. In fact, this formation was not a killing formation, but more like an auxiliary formation. Its biggest function was to connect everyone in the formation together, so that their vital essences could be intertwined and converge to achieve the purpose of glory and glory. No, the power of the formation has decreased by at least 30% after losing the central Wuji apricot yellow flag. Let me be the eye of the formation. After saying that, Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen prepared to move to the lost corner. However, at this moment, Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan pulled him back without batting an eyelid and then shook his head slightly. What's wrong? Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen, who had always been straightforward, was confused. Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, who was next to him, directly pulled him to his side and softly explained to him. What? After hearing Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell's explanation, Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen's expression was interesting. It turned out that Yuhuan Tianzuan wanted his subordinates to block the attack for him. Who did Qinshi really want to kill? Wasn't it the Heavenly Lords present? As the leaders of Heaven Capital, the 7 of them were the real culprits that caused Earth to suffer. Since the 7 of them were no match for Qinshi, then the best way. Obviously, they wanted their subordinates to block the attack. Now that the 7 of them were in the center of the formation, if Qinshi wanted to successfully kill them, he had to break through the formation first. However, the formation connected everyone's lives tightly together. As the saying goes, unity is strength. If Qinshi was determined to kill them, then he would kill everyone present first. It was just that these silly heavenly generals and star lords had been betrayed by Yuhuan Tianzuan without realizing it. Instead, they firmly believed that they were fighting for their dignity. It was just like the slogan they chanted, everything was for the prestige of the Holy Ancestor, everything was for the glory of Heaven Capital. With the appearance of Qin Shi, the final battle between him and Heaven Capital finally began. The remaining half of Xingcha was still flying in the universe. The fairy-like Supreme Palace enclosure was not far ahead. However, this last stretch of distance, it turned this Xingcha into a purgatory on Earth. Qin Shi attacked fiercely again and again, but the formation dissolved them into nothingness time and time again. It was true that he was a supreme. However, in such a short period of time, even a supreme was somewhat helpless in the face of such a tenacious resistance from everyone. Qin Shi was somewhat confused. What was wrong with these people? Why did they suddenly become so fearless of death? As soon as he showed himself, all sorts of magical treasures and spells would be thrown at him. He slashed at the formation's shield again and again. With every slash, the violent impact caused by the collision of true essence would be instantly dispersed to everyone. In the face of such frequent attacks, those with lower cultivation would be shaken to the point that their heart meridians would be broken and their 7 orifices would bleed. Even so, every time someone could not withstand the strong impact brought about by Qin Shi, they would immediately rush out of the formation and use their last breath to detonate their golden core, temporarily relieving some pressure on their companions behind them. The 7 celestial venerables stood on the high platform and watched everything in front of them. Although he could not bear it, Celestial Venerable Xuanzhen finally listened to Celestial Venerable Wondrous Spell's dissuasion. He stood on the high platform with the other Celestial Venerables and constantly pretended to gesture. Those who could cultivate to this level were not fools. Even ants wanted to live, so how could the Celestial Venerables not want to live? After all, they were the core of Heaven Capital, and at the same time, they were the future spark of Heaven Capital. As long as they could force Qin to retreat and successfully enter the Supreme Palace enclosure, then Heaven Capital would usher in a new era. In the process of Xingqiao flying to the Supreme Palace enclosure, the remnants of Heaven Capital fell one after another. Every time they self-destructed, it was like a festive firework, shining non-stop in this silent universe. After enduring for 3 breaths, another incense stick of time welcomed. Finally, after nearly half of the people on the ship were gone, a ray of light finally appeared in Yuhuan Tianzuan's eyes. Venerable One, look. That's the Tuoba family's flag. We're saved. Chapter 494. While the remnants of Qiandu were struggling to resist Chen Shi's attack, Tobague's cry of, "We are saved," was no less exciting than a stimulant. Hearing this, Emperor Yuhuan hurriedly turned his head and looked in the direction Tobague was pointing, only to see dozens of star carts flying over at an extremely fast speed. When these starships approached, Yuhuan Tianzuan finally saw the flag of the Tuoba family hanging high on the mast of the main ship. The flag was very exquisite and was definitely not ordinary. There were 2 words written on it, and the flag was embroidered with sea water patterns and clouds. It seemed to imply that the Tuoba family had a long and prosperous history. The reinforcements Tobague had been waiting for, they had finally arrived. There were a total of 24 starships that came to support. When they were about to approach the location of Tobague's group, these starships immediately took the lead with the main ship, and the rest split into 2 sides and spread out in a goose formation. Looking at their momentum, there was a faint air of military formation. Seeing this, Qin Shi temporarily withdrew his true essence and then quietly floated in the void, as if he wanted to see why this group of people had come. "Your Excellency is Mr. Qin? Tuoba Yi is here. Greetings, sir." After the starship stopped, a figure flew out at an extremely fast speed, and then went straight to Qin Shi. The 2 faced each other in space. Qin Shi sized up the other party, and the other party sized him up at the same time. This man who claimed to be the head of the Tuoba family had a cultivation base around the middle stage of divine transformation, which should be at the same level as Yuhuan Tianzuan. Perhaps because he knew that his cultivation base was far lower than Qin Shi, as soon as Tuoba Yi appeared, he took the initiative to respectfully greet Qin Shi. Qin Shi naturally knew why Tuoba Yi had come. Therefore, he didn't even bother to waste time with the other party. After waving his hand indifferently, Qin Shi said coldly, "Since I have chased you all the way here today, I have already made it clear that I will never let this matter go. Get out of the way. You can't stop me." After saying that, Qin Shi's figure disappeared from Tuoba Yi's sight. By the time Tuoba Yi came back to his senses, Qin Shi had already caught up with the dilapidated Xingqiao in front of him and continued to demolish it. Bang! When the sword light emitted by Qin Shi once again collided with the large array, a strong wave of true essence instantly set off in the void. At that moment, the joy of seeing the reinforcements immediately fell to the bottom of the valley. Even though the Tuoba family's reinforcements had arrived, the situation didn't seem to have improved. Qin Shi was still attacking the formation. Everyone was still struggling to hold on under his attacks. Inside the array, Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others looked at the sky with stern expressions. At this point, they could only place all their hopes on Tuoba Yi. They could only hope that everything was as Tuoba Gue said, that the Tuoba family was willing to offend a supreme in exchange for the alliance of the entire Heaven Capital. Otherwise, Yuhuan Tianzuan could only use his own method to deal with the catastrophe in front of him. "Mr. Qin, can you stop and listen to me?" Qin Shi's reaction was completely out of Tuoba Yi's expectations. It was true that Qin Shi was a supreme. However, Tuoba Yi was not bad either. As the leader of the Tuoba family, Tuoba Yi represented the entire Tuoba family's will. Seeing Qin Shi's unreasonable and ruthless way of doing things, it seemed that he didn't put him in his eyes at all. Tuoba Yi's face darkened, and he had to quickly change his plan. Thus, he came in front of Qin Shi again and suddenly opened his arms, as if he wanted to stop Qin Shi from continuing to attack Xingqiao. "You want to die?" Seeing this, Qin did not hesitate. He raised the long sword in his hand and slashed at the array again. Not to mention Tuoba Yi, even if the entire Tuoba family stood in front of him today, he would still eat Yuhuan Tianzuan alive. There was no way to talk. There was really no way to talk. Seeing that Qin was treating him like he didn't exist, Tuoba Yi seemed to be a little angry. Thus, Tuoba Yi's eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of fierceness, and then he took out a fan-like thing from his arms. Swoosh. As soon as this magic treasure was taken out, Qin noticed a trace of unusual energy fluctuation from it. He originally left some leeway, intending to give Tuoba Yi a chance to stay out of this. But since Tuoba Yi was so unappreciative, then don't blame him for being merciless. Therefore, the moment Tuoba Yi took out the folding fan, the long sword in Qin's hand suddenly emitted a dazzling light, and then with an unparalleled power, it directly slashed at Tuoba Yi in front of him. Bang! There was no air in space, so naturally sound couldn't be transmitted. With a flash of light, a strong shock wave with true essence as the medium suddenly spread out. Wherever the shock wave went, the meteorites immediately turned into dust and completely disappeared in this vast universe. The star Cha where the people of Tiandu were on was closest to the explosion, so the impact of this star Cha was naturally the strongest. Under such a huge impact, this star Cha was shaken and rolled quickly. After rolling for thousands of meters away, it was under the control of Tuoba Gue that the ship stabilized. Even with the protection of the array, Star Cha was blown away by the explosion. And Tuoba Yi, who took Qin's sword head-on, seemed to be fine. So, when the true essence Qi gradually stabilized, Tuoba Yi gently waved the folding fan in his hand, and then smiled at Qin with a confident face. "Mr. Qin, can we have a good talk now?" Hearing this, Qin's eyes suddenly flashed with a glimmer of light. A mere mid-divine transformation realm cultivator could rely on this fan to block his full-strength attack, and he was not affected at all. This meant that the folding fan in front of him should be the life treasure of a supreme being. And this supreme being was not far away. Thinking of this, Qin immediately closed his eyes and began to carefully observe everything around him. Supreme being. Void. Sure enough, everything was as he expected. Wasn't there a tiny space crack on the Tuoba family's main ship? Humph, pretending to be mysterious. Qin snorted angrily. When he opened his eyes again, a golden light suddenly burst out from his eyes, shooting straight toward the crack. But the moment Qin's eyes shot out the golden light, a slightly old voice suddenly sounded in everyone's ears. "Ha, fellow Taoist, don't be angry. This old man will show himself." As soon as the voice fell, an old man with white hair and beard appeared in front of Qin out of thin air. And at this time, when Tuoba Yi saw the old man appear, he immediately held up the folding fan with both hands, and respectfully returned it to the old man. Tuoba Yi greets Spiritual Master Void Pierce stage. Chapter 495. Even if it was a battle between cultivators, they would usually go through hundreds or even thousands of moves. Only when both parties were exhausted would the victor be decided. It was naturally the same for cultivators. Unless there was a gap in cultivation level, even Qin, who was at the peak of divine transformation realm, could not take Yuhuan Tianzuan's life in 2 or 3 moves. Why was Qindu able to withstand Qin's attacks repeatedly? It was because they had gathered the strength of everyone on the ship. Several thousand immortal cultivators above the gold core stage were using the cosmic stars formation as a medium to gather everyone in the formation. Everyone was bound together for good or ill, and everyone was bound together for good or ill. Let's give a simple example. If Qin's attack was compared to a flood, then the people of Tiandu were a dam. The dam was eroded bit by the flood. When the dam could no longer withstand the impact of the flood, the entire dam would immediately collapse and completely disappear in the torrential flood. Then there was a problem. Tiandu had gathered everyone's strength, but they could only barely hold on for a while. How could this Tuoba Yi, who was only at the middle stage of divine transformation realm, be able to withstand Qin's sword attack without suffering any injuries? How could there be nothing fishy about it? Qin immediately understood why Tuoba Yi could withstand his sword attack. The reason was very simple. Because there was an expert helping him in secret. The folding fan was Taoist Master Chongshu's natal magic treasure. Taoist Master Chongshu himself was a supreme existence. He could freely travel through the void like Qin. Because he had been hiding in the void and was not in the main plane, even Qin could not discover his existence immediately. Taoist Master Chongshu? After hearing Tuoba Yi's words, Qin could not help but frown slightly and asked coldly, You are not a member of Tuoba family? Hearing this, Taoist Master Chongshu chuckled. The smile on his face was just like the spring breeze, which formed a sharp contrast with the indifference on Qin Shi's face. My name is Master Chongshu. I am the sect master of Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. Jade Clear Grotto Heaven? Qin Shi had long heard of this name from Cheng Hua. Therefore, after hearing the old man's self-introduction, Qin Shi immediately understood everything. Jade Clear Grotto Heaven should be the strongest force in the Supreme Palace enclosure, right? With the current strength of the Tuoba family, even with the addition of Tiandu, they simply could not withstand the fury of Qin Shi. Tuoba Yi was very smart, but he was also very greedy. Just like Tobagwe. This was human nature. The moment Tuoba Yi received the news, he began to repeatedly weigh the gains and losses. As he thought about it, he finally couldn't resist the temptation and made the same choice as Tobagwe. Benefits always coexist with risks. If the ownership of Tiandu was viewed as a benefit, then Qin Shi was the greatest risk. Just like doing business, in order to ensure that the Tuoba family would not go for wool and come back shorn, Tuoba Yi made up his mind and took the initiative to find Immortal Chongshu, hoping to share the risk of the Tuoba family and obtain benefits in a more secure way. One had to know that immortal cultivators were all people who would not rise early without benefits. Therefore, although Reverend Chongshu appeared to be kind and harmless, he might have secretly done a lot of atrocious and inhumane things. Jade Clear Grotto Heaven? Why did Immortal Chongshu come here? Wasn't it because he wanted to get a share of the profits? Therefore, Qin Shi was too lazy to talk nonsense with him. With a clench of his right hand, the divine sword Dharma idol appeared in his hand again. Get out of the way. Since you and I are at the same level, you should know that you can't stop me. It's not easy for me to kill you, but killing him is like killing a chicken. Before his voice fell, Qin Shi turned into a stream of light and disappeared in front of Immortal Chongshu. At this time, Tuoba Yi on the side did not even have any reaction. The divine sword Dharma idol suddenly appeared from the void and then slashed down at him. Didn't Tuoba Yi feel very proud of taking Qin Shi's sword head-on just now? Therefore, Qin Shi wanted to see if Tuoba Yi could still be proud now. A cold light flashed, and Tuoba Yi suddenly opened his eyes wide with an expression of disbelief on his face. He never thought that Qin Shi actually attacked him so abruptly in front of Taoist Master Void Pierce. This sword strike was simply too fast. It was like teleportation. With the flash of the sword light, an extremely fine wound appeared between Tuoba Yi's eyebrows. And this was obviously the true power of the Moonlight Sword technique. The first move of the Moonlight Sword technique, a sword hiding in the void. This sudden turn of events caused Taoist Master Void Pierce to be stunned on the spot. Everyone was at the insightful Void Realm. Who could be faster than the other? Therefore, in the situation where Qin Shi had the upper hand, Immortal Chongshu had no time to rescue him. Arrogant. Arrogant to the extreme. I'm so angry. Reverend Chongshu let out a long whistle. The folding fan in his hand suddenly flew out like a sharp flying disc, following closely behind Qin Shi. Seeing this, Qin Shi smiled coldly and escaped into the void again. Insightful emptiness. Insight into the void, traversing freely. From the beginning to the end, Qin Shi had no intention of fighting with Immortal Chongshu. Did he really think that he could scare him by using an insightful emptiness? What a joke. Everyone was at the insightful emptiness, who could do anything to who. Qin Shi couldn't kill Immortal Chongshu, just like how Immortal Chongshu couldn't kill him. But, although Qin Shi could not do anything to Reverend Chongsu, he could completely abandon Reverend Chongsu and turn his attention to Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan and the rest. Therefore, after Immortal Chongshu made his move, Qin Shi didn't pay attention to him at all. Instead, he went near Xingcha again and continued his forceful demolition. Peng. Peng. Qin Shi flew in front with his long sword, while Immortal Chongshu chased behind with his fan. The two of them started a game of "you chase me" around Xingcha. However, the long sword in Qin Shi's hand didn't stop for a moment. As he continued to attack, the casualties of Tiandu also increased. In the end, almost no gold core realm cultivator could still stand on the ship. It's over, the great formation is about to break. Quickly support. As the saying goes, no egg can remain intact when the nest is overturned. Seeing that the situation was so critical, several celestial venerables no longer cared about preserving their strength. They had to jump into the eye of the formation and forcibly prolong the life of the tottering heavenly cycle star formation. But at this moment, Tobagwe, who had been steering the ship, suddenly exclaimed, "Venerable! We have arrived at Supreme Palace enclosure." Hearing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately came to his side. After looking down at the land below, Yuhuan Tianzuan's eyes flashed with a trace of sternness, and he ordered coldly, "Continue flying, don't stop." Bagui seemed to not understand what he meant. Continue flying? Fly to where? They had already arrived at Supreme Palace enclosure. Why didn't they scatter and flee? Anyway, no matter how strong Qin Shi was, he was only one person. As long as everyone ran separately, could he really catch them one by one? Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't have the slightest intention of explaining. Instead, he seemed to suddenly think of something and suddenly asked, "Where is Jade Clear Grotto Heaven?" "In Central State." "Then go to Central State, quick." Chapter 496. The Middle State was located in the middle of the Supreme Palace enclosure. There were many mountains in the territory, and one of them was the most well-known, the Heavenly Yu Mountain. The Heavenly Yu Mountain stretched for hundreds of miles. There were many rivers at the foot of the mountain and many cliffs at the top. It could be said that the mountain was high and the river was dangerous. In addition, the mountain was shrouded in clouds all year round. The spiritual energy in the mountain was far superior to the outside world. Therefore, it was also called the first paradise of the Supreme Palace enclosure. The name of the Jade Clear Paradise came from this. On this day, many disciples of the Jade Clear Paradise were carrying out their daily cultivation in the square. Suddenly, a dilapidated large Xingcha appeared in the clouds of the distant mountain. The disciples looked up and saw that the Xingcha seemed to have entered an uninhabited land. After breaking through the mountain gates formation, it directly landed in the square. Boom! With a loud sound, the dilapidated Xingcha finally completed its final mission and turned into a pile of debris in the martial arts practice field. Who is it? Who dares to break into the Jade Clear Paradise and destroy our mountain gate? Disciples, listen to my order. Take them down. Under the command of the Elder of Imparting Arts, all the disciples stepped forward, ready to capture all the people on the ship. But at this moment, a few loud sounds suddenly came from afar. At the same time, it was accompanied by an extremely strong wave of true essence. The strength of the two sides was so strong that even Elder Chuan, who had already stepped into the Yuanying realm, could not help but be frightened to the point of losing his sense of propriety. He did not even have time to order the disciples to immediately return to the main hall. A sword light suddenly fell from the sky and directly hit the wreckage of the Xingcha in the middle of the martial arts practice field. Bang! At that moment, Elder Chuan's eyes widened and his eyes were about to burst. However, he could only watch helplessly as a burst of powerful true essence suddenly erupted on the martial arts practice field. It was like throwing a grenade in the middle of a busy street. The shockwaves from the explosion immediately shook all the disciples and made them vomit blood. Everyone was instantly sent flying dozens of meters away. Elder Chuan stared blankly at the center of the martial arts practice field. He saw a large formation slowly rising from the wreckage of the Xingcha. It seemed to be defending against external attacks. What was going on? This sudden turn of events caused Elder Gong Chuan to lose his composure. At this moment, a loud and resounding bell sound came from the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. It was a warning bell. It meant that there was an enemy attack. The moment the bell rang, 3 figures flew out of Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. After a short meeting, the 3 of them turned into streams of light and completely disappeared from the technique imparting elder's sight. This is Tongxian Nanhua and Dongling? Elder technique imparting elder was completely stunned. Profound enlightening Nanhua Dongling. If a void peer stage expert was included, then the 4 great reverends of the Jade Clear Heavenly Grotto Heaven would be gathered. The 3 ancestors had been in seclusion for many years and had long stopped caring about worldly affairs. His sudden appearance today meant that the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven was about to face a great calamity? Thinking of this, Elder Gong Chuan suddenly felt a chill in his heart. Therefore, he no longer cared about Xingcha's remains in the middle of the drill ground. Instead, he led the group of disciples and quickly returned to the main hall. Wasn't Yuhuan Tianzuan and his group on the Xingcha ship that suddenly fell into the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven? Under Qin Shi's continuous attacks, the damage to Tiandu was getting heavier and heavier. Seeing that the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven was right in front of him, Yuhuan Tianzuan gritted his teeth and ordered everyone to withdraw the grand formation to reduce the pressure that they had to bear. The result of doing so was obvious. After losing the protection of the grand formation, Xingcha, which was already badly damaged, was immediately shot down by Qin Shi and smashed into the drill ground of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. It finally stopped. Presumably, it would also stop here forever in the future. Venerable, this Xingxia has been destroyed. What should we do next? Tobague stood beside Yuhuan Tianzuan with a terrified expression. One should know that just now, he saw with his own eyes that Tuoba Yi was struck by Chen Shi's sword. With Tuoba Ye's mid-divine transformation realm cultivation base, it should be impossible for him to die so easily. However, with Chen Shi's cultivation base, this sword would at least cause irreparable damage to Tuoba Yi. Therefore, when he thought that Chen Shi didn't even give face to Taoist Master Void Peer stage and was determined to kill them today, Tobague was so scared that he almost couldn't stand still. If he had known that this matter would become so big, even if he was beaten to death, he would never take half a step into the Heaven's Pivot ruins. At this point, the third party, including Taoist Master Void Peer stage, had reached the point where they couldn't back down. Yuhuan Tianzuan wanted to run. Chen Shi wanted to chase after him. Taoist Master Void Peer stage wanted to stop him. If Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't run, Chen Shi would kill him. If Chen Shi didn't kill him, how could the Heart Demon Oath be fulfilled? As the third party, if Taoist Master Void Peer stage couldn't stop Chen Shi, where should he put his old face? Due to the above reasons, today's matter was destined to be difficult to resolve. After hearing Tobague's question, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't answer for a long time. His face was gloomy and no one knew what he was thinking. Venerable? Venerable? Seeing that Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't answer, Tobague had to be like an ant on a hot pan, anxiously pacing around the array. Losing Xingxia meant that they lost the ability to move. Although the array hadn't been broken yet, how long could it last? Were they really going to sit here and wait for death? Tobague was annoyed. If it weren't for the fear that Yuhuan Tianzuan might suddenly turn hostile, he would have already fled. Just as Tobague was anxious, a dazzling light suddenly bloomed in the distant sky. Immediately afterward, 5 figures appeared out of thin air in the huge martial arts field. It was Chen Shi and the 4 Taoist masters. They saw. Chen Shi stood alone in the middle of the martial arts field, facing the remains of Xingxia. The 4 Taoist masters stood in the 4 corners of the martial arts field, trying to trap Chen Shi. Although Chen Shi was surrounded by the 4 Taoist masters, there was no panic on his face. Instead, there was a faint smile on his face. Like a hunter who was preparing to capture his prey from a trap, even if he was surrounded, Chen Shi's attention wasn't on the 4 Taoist masters at all. Instead, it was focused on Yuhuan Tianzuan. Chen Shi and Yuhuan Tianzuan looked at each other across the air. He didn't make any move. After the 4 Taoist masters looked at each other, they had to forcibly suppress the idea of striking first. One had to know that this was a battle between Taoist masters. Although they had the advantage in numbers, if they really started fighting, it would take a while for them to end the battle. If Chen Shi was determined to fight here, wouldn't the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven be destroyed because of this? At that time, where would they go to cry? The 4 Taoist masters had scruples in their hearts, so they didn't dare to take the initiative to provoke him. The scene suddenly calmed down. Chen Shi just looked at Yuhuan Tianzuan quietly, without any emotional fluctuations in his eyes. If it was said that he was a bloodthirsty beast before, then he was now a bloodthirsty beast. Then at this moment, Chen Shi was a quiet pool of water, so calm that there wasn't a single ripple. And under Chen Shi's gaze, Yuhuan Tianzuan couldn't help but feel an inexplicable pressure in his heart. At that moment, Yuhuan Tianzuan felt like a monkey in a cage. He finally understood. He understood why Chen Shi was smiling. So he couldn't help but shake his head and laugh like Chen Shi. But that smile? It obviously looked a little forced. Some choices once made can never be turned back. I think you should understand now, right? Chen Shi was the first to speak, breaking the silence. Suddenly, a cool breeze blew from the mountain range in the distance, causing the branches to rustle and sway. It made the martial arts practice ground look especially cold and cheerless. The scene in front of them was really out of everyone's expectations. Why did the 4 Taoist masters move together? Wasn't it because they were worried that Chen Shi might wreak havoc in this pure land of inheritance? But the result? When Chen Shi really forced Yuhuan Tianzuan into a desperate situation, he didn't seem to have any intention of immediately making a move. What was going on? Chapter 497. On the huge martial arts practice field, everyone was waiting for him. After Chen Shi broke the silence, a complicated expression appeared on Yuhuan Tianzuan's face. No one knew what he was really thinking and no one could understand his complicated feelings. Yuhuan Tianzuan remained silent, as if he had no intention of responding. Seeing this, Qin Shi could not help but smile, and the divine sword Dharma idol appeared in his hand again. Still want to fight? Seeing Qin Shi take out his sword, the four perfected masters' expressions changed drastically. They immediately retreated to the direction of the main hall, afraid that the main hall would be destroyed by the battle. Two Supremes and two peak soul formation cultivators. This was the true strength of the four perfected masters, and also the reason why the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven could dominate the Supreme Palace enclosure. Even so, they did not want to continue fighting. Because, Qin Shi was a supreme being. As long as a cultivator reached the insightful emptiness realm, their survival ability would skyrocket. Unless they could accurately find the threads of law that Qin Shi controlled, the four perfected masters would not be able to stop Qin Shi. The world was so big, where could he not go? Qin Shi was alone. Even if he turned the Supreme Palace enclosure upside down, it would have nothing to do with him. Since the four perfected masters were responsible for the inheritance of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, how could they allow this land of inheritance to be affected by the flames of war? Therefore, even though Taoist Master Void Pierce had been brushed off by Qin Shi earlier, he had no choice but to restrain the thought of making a move at this moment. Instead, he persuaded Qin Shi with kind words. Fellow Taoist, listen to this old man. I've never heard of a supreme being in the Dubhe ruins. Since you've appeared, it means that you should be the owner of the Dubhe ruins. Now you've chased after this group of people for thousands of miles. There must be a reason for this. There must be a reason to kill them. This is a matter of the Dubhe ruins. The Jade Clear Grotto Heaven should not be involved. But now this matter has already affected the Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, I can only represent the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven and be forced to talk to you. I only hope that fellow Taoists can understand. This is the Supreme Palace enclosure, not the Tianshu ruins. Fellow Taoist, if you are willing to stop and make peace with my Supreme Palace enclosure, this old man is willing to be the middleman. I guarantee that I will give you a satisfactory answer, okay? After a long talk, Taoist Master Chongshu also made his attitude very clear. It was true that he was plotting against Tiandu, but he wasn't willing to involve Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. So as long as Qin Shi was willing to sit down and talk, he might be able to come up with a solution that would satisfy everyone. However, after hearing this, Qin Shi did not immediately respond. Instead, he looked at Yuhuan Tianzuan with a playful expression and said slowly in a very calm tone, Yuhuan, do you know what your biggest problem is? That means he likes to act smart. To be honest, the existence of Tiandu means nothing to me. I remember that I once said that I would give you the appropriate treatment based on your performance. If you guys perform well, wouldn't I be less worried? At this point, Qin Shi suddenly shook his head and continued in a sigh, what a pity, what a pity, you are too arrogant. This kind of arrogance has been deeply rooted in your bones. You are the master of Tiandu, so you can't tolerate being a prisoner at all. No matter how good the conditions I give you, as long as there is a chance, you will still choose to be my enemy, am I right? Qin Shi's voice came to an abrupt stop. He had said what he should say. There was no need to say what he shouldn't say. Why did he chase him all the way to the Supreme Palace enclosure? The Heart Demon Oath was only one of the reasons. In fact, Yuhuan Tianzuan's biggest mistake was actually, even if he guessed that Qin Shi might care a lot about the mortals on earth, he did not guess the weight of these mortals in Qin Shi's heart. If Yuhuan Tianzuan had not delayed Qin Shi in such a brutal way, perhaps Qin Shi might have turned a blind eye and let Tiandu live. So what if he was a celestial lord? In Qin Shi's eyes, he was no different from an ordinary person. Although he had not returned to Earth and was unable to determine how much damage this disaster had caused to mankind. But as long as he thought about it, he could come up with a rough figure in his heart. This was definitely an astronomical figure. And compared to these innocent victims, what were the mere thousands of people in Tiandu? So, they must die. So what if they escaped to the Supreme Palace enclosure? So what if they found the four great spiritual masters? If I say I want to kill you, then I must kill you. This was Qin Shi's attitude. The four great spiritual masters did not understand. However, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly understood. Remove the great formation. At that moment, he was like an old man on the verge of death, waving his hand dispiritedly to signal everyone to remove the great formation. Everyone could not help but look at each other, completely unable to understand what he meant. In this regard, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not explain much. Instead, he directly walked out of the protective range of the great formation in front of everyone present. Mr. Qin? Yuhuan Tianzuan paused for a moment, then suddenly lowered his head to Qin Shi and said, this old man knows his mistake. Qin Shi did not reply. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan could not help but reveal a bitter smile. This old man is the head of the 10 celestial sovereigns. Everything in Chengdu is decided by this old man alone. Today's matter is all because of this old man. This old man knows that his sins are grave, and does not dare to ask for Mr.'s forgiveness. I only hope that Mr. can give these poor children a way out on account of the fact that my Chengdu has long since ceased to exist in name. As he spoke, Yuhuan Tianzuan turned his head to look at the remnants of the Chengdu battalion behind him. At this time, everyone finally understood what he wanted to do, so they all tried to dissuade him. Sky Sovereign, we are not afraid of him. Come back quickly. We can still hold on. At most, we'll just die in the bird's nest. What are we afraid of? Right. We're not afraid of him. For the prestige of the sacred ancestor. For the glory of Chengdu. These people in front of him were the last hope of Chengdu. Yuhuan Tianzuan silently looked at the crowd, but the corner of his mouth suddenly revealed a faint smile. Then he turned to look at Qin Shi. Didn't Qin Shi want him to give a reasonable explanation? Then try your best. Since things have come to this old man is only willing to use my blood to quell the anger in your heart. I only hope that Mr. can let them live. Sigh. After a deep sigh, this Yuhuan Tianzuan, who had been in charge of Chengdu for hundreds of years, completely turned into a cloud of smoke and disappeared in front of everyone's eyes. However, even though Yuhuan Tianzuan had died on the spot, the sword in Qin Shi's hand still did not disappear. He looked at everything in front of him indifferently. It seemed that he was not very satisfied with this result. Seeing this, the remaining Empyreans couldn't help but look at each other. Then, as if they had made up their minds, they all walked out of the range of the great array. The successive deaths of the 10 Empyreans seemed to announce the end of the era that belonged to Chengdu. And with their fall, everything that happened today was destined to be recorded in the annals of history. On this day, Qin Shi alone, in the Supreme Palace enclosure's jade clear grotto heaven, forced back the 4 great spiritual masters, and forced the 10 Empyreans to their deaths. The Lord of the Sky's core. From this, his might shook the Supreme Palace enclosure. Chapter 498. After the death of the 10 Empyreans, Tobague naturally couldn't escape death. In this regard, Qin Shi's face didn't show much emotion. As if he was looking at a very ordinary thing, after taking a deep look at the hundreds of people left in Chengdu, the long sword in his hand turned into a wisp of smoke and dissipated in front of him. Since the culprits had all been killed, Qin Shi was too lazy to kill them all. It was just to give some face to the sacred ancestor, so that the inheritance of Chengdu would not be cut off because of this. Then Qin Shi finally cast his gaze on Taoist Master Void Pierce again. He did not have a good impression of these 4 greedy old bastards. Thus, he hastily cupped his hands and bowed. Then he coldly said, "This matter is over. This Qin will not disturb you all any longer. Goodbye." As soon as his voice fell, without waiting for Taoist Master Void Pierce's reply, Qin Shi had turned into a stream of light and completely disappeared from jade clear grotto heaven. Taoist cave spirit seemed to be a little dissatisfied with Qin Shi's arrogant attitude, so after a cold snort, he wanted to move forward to stop him. However, just as Taoist cave spirit was about to move, Taoist Master Void Pierce suddenly stopped him. "Junior brother, don't act rashly. This person's cultivation is almost the same as mine, and his grasp of the true meaning of the word void is quite proficient. Even if the 4 of us join forces, we don't have full confidence that we can stop him today. In that case, why would Jade Clear Grotto Heaven want to make such a strong enemy for no reason? Let him go, today's matter is over. In addition, regarding the aftermath of Chengdu, everything will be handed over to Junior Brother Tongxian to deal with. Junior Brother Cave Spirit, come with me, Senior Brother has something to say to you." Qin Shi left the Supreme Palace enclosure just like that. He didn't even bother to think about any problems related to Chengdu, because everything that happened next had nothing to do with him. And the reason why he didn't kill Chengdu was actually because of this. The 4 Taoist masters seemed to have lost face, but in the end they also got the benefits they wanted, namely, the remnants of Chengdu. Chengdu represented an era. An era that was completely different from the Supreme Palace enclosure. The 4 spiritual masters could tolerate Qin Shi brushing away their face, but they absolutely could not tolerate Qin Shi killing the remnants of the Chengdu division in front of them. If that was the case, wouldn't it mean that all their hard work today was in vain? Although the celestial sovereigns of the 10 directions had fallen, the sacred ancestor Taiching's inheritance had been passed down. This was the inheritance from the Dubhe ruins. How could the jade clear grotto heaven not be tempted? And this was the bottom line of the four sages. If Qin Shi's bottom line was to kill all the culprits, then Yu Huan Tianzuan's bottom line was to let Tiandu's inheritance continue. All three parties had their own bottom lines. In the end, it was obvious that the final result could only be produced under the condition that these three bottom lines were not touched. Back to Qin Shi. After leaving the Supreme Palace enclosure, Qin Shi did not rush back to Earth immediately. Instead, he stayed near the Aot Nebula for a while. Everything that had happened before could be considered as a reminder to Qin Shi. After losing the protection of the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars, the solar system had long been reduced to a vegetable market where everyone could enter and exit freely. Naturally, Qin Shi was very dissatisfied with this. The universe was so big. If the Supreme Palace enclosure could appear today, who knew what kind of terrifying monster would appear tomorrow? The current Earth was still too weak and could not withstand such repeated torment. Therefore, the matter of reactivating the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars was imperative. Thinking of this, Qin Shi took out the soul mirror and studied it carefully. However, this broken mirror had been in a sealed state ever since he forcefully brought out the remnant soul of his sister-in-law. Even if Qin Shi used all kinds of methods, he could not successfully activate it. Helpless, Qin Shi could only temporarily put aside the idea of reactivating the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars, and use his own method to build a barrier for the solar system. The Tai Ching divine ancestor used the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars to seal the entire solar system. Such a shocking move could not be done by a mere insightful emptiness realm cultivator. Therefore, Qin Shi could only use a more clever method, and that was setting up one after another waymark in the Aot Nebula, and finally connecting these waymarks together to serve as a warning. Although the waymarks could not prevent outsiders from entering like the grand formation, Qin Shi could be informed of the news immediately and set off to check it out. Although this arrangement was a little strenuous and unrewarding, it played a certain defensive role. Presumably, today's incident would not happen again. Besides, judging from the commotion Qin Shi had caused at the Supreme Palace enclosure earlier, even if someone wanted to sneak into the Tianshu ruins to investigate in the future, they would probably think twice before doing so. After all, there was a living paragon living inside. Because the Aot Nebula was simply too big, by the time Qin Shi finished setting up the waymarks and successfully returned to Earth, nearly half a month had passed. This was the first time Qin Shi had left without saying goodbye. The little girl clearly remembered what Qin Shi had said to her before he left. Therefore, every day after school she would sit in the courtyard with Big Cat in her arms and stare at the sky, constantly muttering when her father would come back. The April sun shone on the ground, causing the calm lake to sparkle. The willows on the shore of Hohai gently swayed their bodies, as if telling passers-by the beauty of summer. In the blink of an eye. That cute little girl back then. She was almost 7 years old now. 7 years old. Whenever a child reached this age and stayed in school for a period of time, there would inevitably be some new changes in their body. The words primary school student. In fact, it was a sign that she had already entered another important stage in her life. Because at this age, children would no longer be as ignorant as before. Instead, they would learn to think like adults. For example, Nyenyen was now thinking about a very important question. Big Cat, I remember you could become bigger in the past? I was riding on top of you. Why can't you become bigger now? Hurry up and show me. As she spoke, Nyenyen picked up Big Cat with both hands, lifted it in the air and shook it left and right. In this regard, Big Cat rolled its eyes and pretended not to hear. One had to know that Qin Roing hadn't even returned home when the little guy rode the Big Cat. And as she grew older, Qin Shi had already ordered Big Cat not to change back to its original form. After not seeing Big Cat for 2 or 3 years, the little girl's memory would inevitably be a little different. Therefore, she could not help but wonder if she remembered wrongly. With Big Cat's small body, how could it carry her? Girls develop earlier than boys. In addition, she would be 7 years old next month, so Nyenyen's height had already reached 2 meters. She had to buy an adult ticket to board the plane. But what about Big Cat? This guy was still the same as before, a little bigger than a fart, as if there was no change at all. Chapter 499. April in the Human World. Hundreds of flowers bloomed, willow trees were graceful, clear water conveyed love, mountain ranges were covered in fragrances everywhere. It was a sunny afternoon, but faint thoughts were flowing slowly in this overflowing spring. Nyenyen hugged Big Cat and sat quietly on a chair. However, her pair of beautiful big eyes looked around from time to time. She only hoped that in the blink of an eye, she would be able to see her father suddenly appear by her side. Perhaps she was already used to Qin not being at home for a long time, so after the little guy was in a daze in the courtyard for a while, he hugged Big Cat and ran out of the Chuehua gate. "Mom, I'm going to find Wenwen and Mingming to play." After saying that, without waiting for Qin Ruoying to reply, the little guy had already opened the gate. This was her daily schedule outside of school. Either the brothers came to her house to watch cartoons, or she went out to find the brothers to walk around outside. Every time at this time, Cheng-Hua and Yi would follow behind her with a frown, looking at the three little guys running around Hohai. The way of the world now was not the same as before. In the past, no matter the age of the child, as long as they learned to run, they could play with the group. Their parents might come from the same brigade or from the same courtyard. In short, no matter the age, the children would always naturally gather together. A group of people would run over, and a group of people would run over. At that time there were no exquisite toys. Among the children there would naturally be a child king. Then, under the lead of this child king, a group of people would go up the mountain to catch cicadas today, and go into the water to catch fish tomorrow. Once the weather was bad, everyone would hide in the old factory to play hide and seek, play jump rope, and live a happy life. Such a pure childhood. Thinking about it, it was very beautiful. But it was a pity, with the change of time, these forms of entertainment had basically bid farewell to the children's childhood. Instead, there were mobile phones, iPads, cartoons, and all kinds of exquisite toys. The times were progressing, but people's hearts were becoming more and more indifferent. In the past, as long as a child stood outside the door and shouted, even if the child was only 4 or 5 years old, the parents could let him go out to play without worry. What if they tried it now? Wouldn't their parents chase after them with a broom? It was rare to see parents who allowed their children to roam freely in the neighborhood. More and more children were restricted by their parents to a safe range that they could accept, which also led to the children having less and less contact with peers of the same age. There was an essay question called "My Little Friends in Primary School Chinese." The frequency of this question appearing was second only to "The Most Unforgettable Thing" and "My Parents." Who knew which little friend the children were thinking of when they were writing this essay? Luban number 7 or Arthur? The three little fellows strolled around Hohai. After seeing many people swimming in the water, they stood by the shore and eagerly watched. They had learned how to skate, but they had not learned how to swim yet. Therefore, after seeing so many people frolicking in the lake, the three little fellows were immediately moved. The water quality in Hohai is very good. Swimming in the wild here can be considered a custom of the old Shangjing people. Although the authorities clearly prohibited swimming in Hohai, it couldn't stop the enthusiasm of the local people. Once the weather warmed up, more and more people would sneak to Hohai to swim. "Nyin, I heard from the teacher that cats can swim. How about, let's throw Big Cat into the water and see if it can swim?" Summer vacation was in 2 months. When school started in the second half of the year, the three of them would officially enter the 2nd grade. As they got older, the brothers came up with more and more bad ideas. One guessed that if she sneaked into the water, Gu Lao would drag her to the yard and beat her repeatedly when she got home. Therefore, she came up with the idea of the Big Cat. The old man strictly forbade them from swimming in the river, but he didn't say that Big Cat was not allowed to swim in the river. Therefore, after hearing Wenwen's suggestion, the little fellow was obviously moved. She had been to the sea and she had also been to the water. However, the turbulent water was obviously different from the calm lake in front of her. And because she had seen the sea, the moment she heard Wenwen's suggestion, Nyin was slightly excited and said to the Big Cat, "Big Cat, do you like swimming? Swimming is fun. I'll take you to swim, okay?" The Big Cat was lying lazily in her arms and taking a nap. The moment it heard the little fellow say that she was going to take it to swim, its feline instincts made its hair stand on end. Meow. The three children were standing by the lake, and there were steps under the river embankment. According to Nyinyin's idea, after letting the Big Cat swim in the water, they could stand here and take the Big Cat back. Therefore, she didn't even wait for the Big Cat to come back to its senses. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly let go and threw the Big Cat directly into the back of the lake. Meow. This time the Big Cat was really panicking. As a cat, it was one thing to be able to swim, but it was another thing to be afraid of water. Therefore, the moment it was thrown out by Nyin, the Big Cat began to twist its body crazily in the air. It wanted to borrow strength, but it couldn't find any place to do so. It could only watch as it got closer and closer to the deep lake. Meow. With a shriek, its body suddenly expanded by 30% in the air. It was instinctive to be afraid of water. Driven by its instincts, it obviously didn't care about Chen Shi's constant warnings. Therefore, the moment the big cat was about to fall into the water, its body grew at least 2 to 3 times its original size. But at this moment, a ray of vital energy shot out from nowhere, and then it forced the big cat back into its domestic cat form. What? With the sound of falling into the water, the big cat seemed to have suffered a great grievance, and soaked in the water, it meowed miserably. Yin, look. I told you it could swim. Seeing that the big cat didn't sink into the water, the two brothers immediately shouted happily. However, when Yin saw the big cat's pitiful appearance, she suddenly thought of something, so she quickly walked down the steps, then stood on the shore and waved at the big cat. Big cat, come over quickly, the water is cold. As she spoke, Yin reached her hand into the lake. The lake was indeed very cold. Big cat, I'm sorry. The water is so cold, I shouldn't have thrown you into the water. Come, I'll hold you, this way you won't be cold, right? After pulling the big cat out of the lake, Yin began to apologize to the big cat. She completely ignored the big cat's wet body, and directly hugged the big cat into her arms, trying to use her body to drive the cold away for the big cat. Seeing this, the two brothers couldn't laugh anymore. At this time they finally realized that they were in the wrong, so they imitated Yin, surrounded the big cat and apologized with a heart full of guilt. Exploration and practice. This was a process that children had to go through in the process of growing up. Because of the immaturity of the mind, they would always do a lot of unreasonable things unintentionally. At this time, the effect of a parent's blind punishment was far less than the correct guidance. Even if Chen Shi wasn't by her side today, Yin still quickly realized that she was in the wrong. What did this mean? It meant that she was really starting to grow up and gradually forming her own worldview. You have such a cute and sensible daughter. Mr. Chen, you're so lucky. I'm so envious. Just as the three little guys were running in circles around the big cat, Chen Shi and Jiang Yan silently appeared not far behind them. In fact, Chen Shi had come back a long time ago. It was just that he saw that Yin was having fun, so he didn't show up to disturb them. And the reason why Chen Shi didn't go home immediately was because, of course, it was because of Jiang Yan. After all, if Jiang Yan hadn't arrived in time, Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan might have been served with good food and drinks by the Tuoba family right now. Chapter 500. If Jiang Yan had not arrived in time, Yu Huan Tianzuan and his group would have successfully entered the space jump and reached the Supreme Palace enclosure as quickly as possible. Although Chen Shi could chase after Yu Huan Tianzuan to the Supreme Palace enclosure after dealing with the Tuoba family's men of sacrifice. But by that time, Tiandu's group might have already broken up into pieces and scattered in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Could it be? Could Chen Shi plow through the Supreme Palace enclosure and find everyone in Tiandu even if he had to dig 3 feet into the ground? Even if Chen Shi really had the leisure to do so, he did not have so much time to waste in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, it was obviously the best result to be able to catch the remnants of Tiandu before they scattered. Chen Shi was very satisfied with this result. The matter of thanking Jiang Yan was naturally within reason. This was a catastrophe that affected the whole world and appeared almost everywhere at the same time. Although the disaster did not last long, it still brought huge losses to mankind, and the American continent suffered the most. This disaster was unanimously named by scientists all over the world, Skyfire. It was said to be a supernatural phenomenon caused by a solar storm. As for the specific cause of Skyfire, scientists were still researching and had not yet given a rigorous and reasonable report. Skyfire swept across the world, but Wuxia was the least affected. Only the city of Zygaze and a few surrounding villages and towns were attacked by Skyfire. As Europe was too close to Asia, they were the first to receive support from Diyu Island. Africa was poor and Australia was small. These places were sparsely populated and were not the first target of the Tuoba family. Therefore, the American continent, which was far away at the other end of the Pacific Ocean, naturally became the disaster area. Oldme had been through a lot in the past few years. First, there was the threat of the supervolcano, and then there was the trouble of Changhua and Yiji. After a while of peace, Skyfire came again. Perhaps this was retribution. Oldme did not do bad things in Central Asia because of oil, which directly caused the local people to suffer the pain of war. After the Skyfire incident, Oldme could finally have some peace and quiet. Nowadays, the TV stations broadcast the disaster situations all day long. But for the viewers watching the TV, as long as the disaster did not befall them, wouldn't they still be eating and sleeping every day? Disaster relief? That was a matter for the country. At most, the commoners would chat with each other after a meal. Jiang Yin accepted Qin Shi's thanks with a smile. In addition, he also brought a slightly surprising piece of news to Qin Shi. That was, Daiyu Island had officially joined the Wu Lian. Because of this, Jiang Yin became one of the Wu Lian tycoons. His status was even higher than Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanju. All in all, Jiang Yin was much more sensible than Yuhuan Tianzuan. Ever since Jiang Yin had known Qin Shi, this old guy had been sending gifts and running errands for him. The only thing he hadn't done was to enshrine Qin Shi in the ancestral hall. As the saying goes, the older the wiser. Combining the information collected by the 9 serenities and the bits and pieces of information he heard from Qin Shi, Jiang Yin immediately connected the dots and guessed most of it. Seeing that Qin Shi had even taken care of Tiandu, if he still dared to jump around under Qin Shi's nose, wouldn't he be tired of living? Therefore, Jiang Yin immediately changed the management strategy of the 9 serenities. Since he couldn't beat you, he might as well join you. After all, the 9 serenities was different from Tiandu. Jiang Yin didn't have as much self-esteem as Yuhuan Tianzuan, who didn't want to work with. Since there were benefits to following Qin Shi, why would he waste time blindly thinking about it? In this regard, Qin Shi didn't express any opinions. After all, he didn't own Wu Lian and Jiang Yin wasn't his subordinate. Why should he worry so much? If he had the time, he might as well spend it playing with Nian Yin. The days returned to normal. In the blink of an eye. The little girl was now 7 years old and had officially entered the 2nd grade of primary school. It had to be said that Nian Yin was a child that didn't cause anyone to worry about her. As soon as Qin Shi sent Nian Yin to the classroom, the teacher came to find him alone. Nian Yin's class teacher was surnamed Zhang. She was a woman in her 30s or 40s and looked very kind. Mr. Qin, it's like this. Qin Yin's academic results and her performance in all aspects are extremely outstanding in the entire grade. As her class teacher, I feel like I have an obligation to remind you. I wonder, have you ever considered letting Qin Yin skip a grade? Hearing this, Qin Shi couldn't help but be stunned. Skip a grade? In fact, skipping a grade was actually a very common thing in primary school because the Department of Education also had clear regulations in this regard. According to the Department of Education's regulations, as long as the student's academic performance was particularly outstanding and reached the 1st grade in advance, the student or their parents could apply. After a comprehensive assessment by the school and a written report to the Higher Education Department for approval, the student could skip a grade. After all, everyone's IQ was different. There were always children whose IQ was far higher than their peers. She already knew calculus. Did she have to be locked in the classroom with her peers to calculate addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division? Qin Shi had officially begun to teach Nian Yin cultivation. Although he only taught Nian Yin how to gather qi and didn't teach her any techniques after that. However, under the constant scouring of the spirit energy of heaven and earth, Nian Yin's intelligence would inevitably increase by leaps and bounds. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before Nian Yin wouldn't be able to play with the 2 brothers anymore. And this was also the fundamental reason why Qin Shi had always been opposed to letting Nian Yin cultivate. It felt like he was giving Nian Yin a catalyst. It inevitably gave him a strange feeling. There was a saying, hope for your son to become a dragon and hope for your daughter to become a phoenix. Was Qin Shi really different from those flirtatious Qis? Did he really have to turn his daughter into a fool? How was that possible? At this point, Qin Shi could only let nature take its course. Now that the homeroom teacher took the initiative to mention this point, it actually meant that Nian Yin really wasn't suitable to continue staying in the 2nd grade. The matter of skipping grades was something that had to be done. However, before this, Qin Shi still had to ask the little girl for her opinion. After all, there were 2 sides to everything. Grades during the compulsory education period were secondary. Physical and mental health were the most important. Children in the lower grades were not mentally mature. Suddenly changing from a familiar environment to an unfamiliar environment, and surrounded by children who were older than her, naturally took a long time to adapt. Once the child couldn't adapt, the impact could be extremely bad or even irreversible. Therefore, after Qin Shi and teacher Zhang had a detailed discussion, he called the little girl to the office. Nian Yin, tell Daddy, do you want to skip a grade? Chapter 501. Skip a grade? The little girl blinked her eyes as if she did not understand what Qin Shi meant. Seeing this, Qin Shi patiently explained to her, the teacher said that with your grades, you don't need to go to the 2nd grade. You can go directly to the 3rd grade and study with the 3rd grade brothers and sisters. Nian, do you want to go? Hearing this, the little girl smiled proudly. Sure. The students in our class are too stupid. They can't even do such simple questions. I'm much smarter than them. I already know how to do the third grade questions. The little girl's grades were very good. It was inevitable that the teacher would take the initiative to give her special attention, so she had already done the third grade questions before. And this was also the reason why the teacher took the initiative to ask Qin Shi to let Nian skip a grade. To Qin Shi, grades were naturally secondary. A child's physical and mental health was the most important. Therefore, even if the little girl showed an eager look, Qin Shi was still a little worried and reminded her, Nian, you have to think carefully, you're now a student of the second grade class. If you skip a grade, you'll be a student of the second grade class. Look, the second grade class is there. As he said this, Qin Shi led the little girl to the window, then carried her and indicated to her to look at the classroom opposite. That was the second grade class. She did not know any of the classmates in the class. If she chose to skip a grade, then from today onwards she would be a student of this class. For a child, it would be easier for them to understand if there was a real example. Therefore, when the little girl saw the unfamiliar faces in the classroom of the third grade class too, she immediately hesitated. She would be studying in that classroom in the future? The little girl stared at the classroom opposite. The expression on her little face was very serious. She did not immediately express her opinion. However, Qin Shi saw the hesitation in her, so he immediately turned around and smiled at Teacher Zhang. Was there a need to say this? Nian must be scared. Instead of forcing her into an unfamiliar environment, it was better to let her stay in the second grade class. At least it wouldn't bring too much psychological pressure to her. Qin Shi's mind turned and he suddenly made a decision. Zhang Laoshe didn't have any objections to this. After all, she had seen too many situations like this. Basically, every year a few children would face such a choice. There were pros and cons to skipping grades, so she was only responsible for making suggestions. The final decision was still in the hands of the parents. Thank you for your concern, Teacher Zhang. As you can see, this child doesn't seem to be very willing, so the matter of skipping grades. Qin Shi turned around and thanked Teacher Zhang. But at this moment, the little fellow suddenly interrupted him. Dad, what are the benefits of skipping grades? After saying that, the little guy looked up at Qin Shi, his eyes filled with curiosity. Benefits? There are many of them. Look, you have to study for a full 6 years in primary school. If you skip grades, you will study 1 year less than others. You will enter secondary school and even university earlier. Taking 10,000 steps back, if your results aren't good in the future, you can even repeat a year more than others. No matter how you look at it, it's still a win. Of course, with your results, repeating a year is definitely impossible. Dad believes in you. Qin Shi briefly explained the benefits of skipping grades to the little fellow and didn't forget to encourage her at the end. Hearing this, the little fellow put on a thoughtful expression. She already understood the benefits of skipping grades. As for the disadvantages of skipping grades, in fact, Qin Shi didn't need to point it out. The little fellow could clearly feel it herself. Qin Shi never forced the little fellow. So when he saw Nian's hesitation, he immediately made a decision in his heart. However, Qin Shi didn't notice. The little fellow had already learned how to read people's expressions. So even if he didn't express any attitude, the little fellow could keenly sense that her father still hoped that she would choose to skip grades. After all, for any parent, if their child could skip grades, it would be a great thing. Because this showed how outstanding their child was. Qin Shi felt sorry for the little fellow just like how the little fellow felt sorry for him. Nian didn't want to disappoint Qin Shi. Therefore, after thinking about it seriously, she said to Qin Shi with a determined face, Dad, I want to skip grades. This time it was Qin Shi's turn to be surprised. He thought that Nian didn't understand the pros and cons, so he immediately asked, Nian, do you really want to skip grades? Aren't you afraid? After skipping grades, you won't be in this class anymore. The students in class 2 of grade 3 are all 1 year older than you. Who knows, they might even gang up to bully you. As soon as this was said, a trace of embarrassment flashed across Teacher Zhang's face. If she didn't want to skip grades, then so be it. Who would scare a child like this? Furthermore, was their school the kind of third-rate school that would tolerate bullying? Teacher Zhang wanted to say something but stopped. Nian immediately replied, I'm not afraid. Although I'm younger than them, I'm smarter than them. Why should I be afraid? I'm also the class monitor of our class. I want to be the class monitor of grade 3 class 2 in the future. Also, no one in our class dares to bully me. I'll beat up whoever dares to bully me. At this point, Nian clenched her little fist and added proudly, "This is what you taught me, Dad. Did you forget, Dad?" Hearing this, Qin instantly felt awkward. After glancing at Teacher Zhang with some embarrassment, he hurriedly stopped the little fellow's bold words. "Don't talk nonsense. Dad didn't teach you to hit people. Dad, you clearly said that before." "When did I?" "When? The teacher is right next to us. Don't talk nonsense." I did. Dad is shameless." The father and daughter joked around for a while. When Teacher Zhang saw this, he didn't take it to heart. Instead, he went back to his seat and smiled as he handed a form to Qin Shi. "Mr. Qin, this is the child's grade skipping application form. Please fill it in accordingly. After filling it out, I'll submit it to the school for review. After the school's review is completed and the information is submitted to the Education Bureau, the child's school roll can be changed in about 7 working days. Of course, this is all part of the process. School starts today. If you don't have any other opinions, Nian can directly report to grade 3 class 2 with me. That's it?" Qin Shi took the form from the teacher with some hesitation. After all, he didn't know that the little fellow already had her own ideas. He only thought that the little fellow didn't understand the pros and cons of this and thought that it was a fun thing to do. Regarding this, the little fellow was exceptionally resolute. She wasn't afraid. Furthermore, she would perform better than before. She definitely wouldn't disappoint her father. Thinking about it, if Qin Shi knew the little fellow's true thoughts, he would definitely be moved to tears by this considerate little jacket. "Sorry, I've been sorting out the plot for the past 2 days, so the update is a little slow. Please forgive me." Chapter 502. The little girl's third-grade life began abruptly. According to the school's arrangements, today was the day that the new teaching materials were distributed. Hence, after the little girl returned to second-grade class 2 and picked up her backpack, she left the classroom that was supposed to belong to her under the watchful eyes of her classmates. At that moment, Qin Shi saw a proud expression on the little girl's face. It had to be said that this child really made her father proud. Under the guidance of the teacher, Nian quickly arrived at the entrance of third-grade class 2. The form teacher of third-grade class 2 was also a middle-aged woman with the surname Li. She was slightly chubby and looked exceptionally amiable. It should be known that the form teachers of elementary schools were usually not changed easily. From the day the child entered school, the form teacher would always be by their side for the next 6 years until the child graduated. Hence, the moment teacher Li saw Nian, her face was so happy that flowers were about to bloom. Since this child could skip grades, it meant that she had huge potential. In Wuxia, the child's results were naturally the teacher's achievements. Wasn't this equivalent to her picking up a huge bargain? Teacher Li was so happy that she wanted to help Nian carry her backpack. But she didn't expect that. Her suggestion was politely rejected by the little girl. "Thank you, teacher. I'm a student. I should carry my own backpack." Seeing the little girl's obedient manner, Teacher Li was instantly delighted. "Oh. This child is so sensible. You're called Chen, right? I like you." It was class time now, so after a simple exchange of words with Teacher Zhang, Teacher Li directly put her hand on the little girl's shoulder and walked her into third-grade class 2. The third-year students were basically all old foxes. After Teacher Li went out and was delayed for a while, the classroom suddenly became a little noisy. "Come, everyone, quiet down. Let me introduce you. This is our new classmate, Chen Yan. Everyone welcome." After saying that, Teacher Li took the lead in clapping her hands. In an instant, there was a burst of lively applause in the classroom. The little fellow stood nervously beside Teacher Li, looking at the unfamiliar faces below the stage. She suddenly felt a burst of fear in her heart for no reason, so much so that her little face slightly tensed up. "Chen Yan skipped a grade, so he should be 1 year younger than you? But her grades are very good, so she doesn't need to go to the second grade anymore? Now that she's in our class, she'll be the youngest student in our class. As Chen Yan's elder brother and sister, you should..." Speaking up to this point, Teacher Li deliberately paused for a moment, then raised his hand to signal the students present to answer together. Seeing this, the students in the class were also quick-witted. Even if they hadn't rehearsed it beforehand, they all replied in unison, "Take care of her." "Yes. Chen Yan is our younger sister, so we have to take care of her." The little guy was a little confused. The students in the class were too enthusiastic. After hearing such warm applause and cheers, the tension on the little guy's face slowly dissipated, and he gradually revealed a shy smile. She stood silently in the corridor, smiling as he watched his daughter reintegrate into a new big family. This scene was somewhat familiar. That smart and sensible little baby had finally grown into a shy flower bud. Girls matured earlier and Yin was on the tall side. Even in the 3rd grade, she was considered average height, so the teacher could only arrange for her to sit in the 3rd row from the back. One had to know that the little brat now was incredible. Not to mention the 3rd grade, even kindergarten had the phenomenon of puppy love. Regarding this, many parents' reactions were, the child is still young and doesn't know anything. It's just two people together for fun. On this point, their understanding was too one-sided. Actually, children also knew what it meant to be in a relationship. It was just that their thinking was still very simple, and they couldn't understand the meaning of the word sex. What was wrong with children? Couldn't children like other people? Thinking about the opposite sex day and night, yearning for the opposite sex day and night, this wasn't something only adults could do. Children could also like people. It was just that some children were too shy. Even if they liked someone very much, they would never show the slightest bit of it. They would even show an inexplicable hostility to the person they liked. In the words of an adult, it should be, 300 taels of silver here. In Qinshi's eyes, Nian was simply a little kid who hadn't been weaned yet. But in the eyes of her peers, Nian, on the other hand, was a true goddess. There were many precocious children in this class, at least half of them. Therefore, when Nian finished her self-introduction and walked from the podium to her seat, almost everyone was staring at her. Some of the bolder ones stared straight at her, not even blinking their eyes. Some of the more timid ones deliberately turned their heads to the side and secretly looked out of the corner of their eyes. Almost every child had their own thoughts about this student who had suddenly skipped a grade. However, most of the boys' hearts were filled with admiration, while most of the girls' hearts were filled with jealousy. She naturally saw the subtle changes on everyone's faces. However, he was like many parents and didn't take these things to heart. They were just children. They were the flowers of the motherland. They were the pillars of the motherland's future. How could they have so many dirty thoughts? Seeing the little guy sitting down, Qinshi's mood immediately relaxed. He gave Big Cat a look, and the cat immediately understood Qinshi's meaning. So, like a wisp of smoke, it leapt up to the big tree in the middle of the school building, and then laid down on a tree branch facing 3rd year class 2 to take a nap. Then Qinshi nodded at the teacher through the window to thank him, and then quietly left. The little guy seemed to have noticed that her father had left, so she quickly looked out of the window, but there was no one there. Seeing this, a trace of disappointment flashed across her face. But soon this disappointment disappeared with the new teaching materials handed out by the teacher. By the time she took out a fountain pen and solemnly wrote her name on the first page of each book, her 3rd year studies had officially begun. Thieves in 1st grade, thieves in 2nd grade. No one chased after the 3rd grade beauties. Love letters from the 4th grade flew everywhere. Piles of homework from the 5th grade. Pairs of lovebirds from the 6th grade. This is our class song. Once it was too loud and alarmed the teaching director. Then the whole class was scolded by him. Well, at that time I was in 3rd grade. The last few lines are more serious, so I won't write them here. Chapter 503. After settling the little girl down, Qinshi left the school. As soon as he walked out of the school gate, he looked up and saw Qin Ruoying in a white dress, waiting quietly by the side of the road. In fact, Qinshi had already said that there was no need for two people to pick up and drop off the child, but Qin Ruoying did not pay attention to him at all, and completely treated sending Yin to school as something that she had to do every day. Ying, okay, where do you want to go today? I'll go with you. Before he arrived, Qinshi's voice came from afar. Qin Ruoying thought for a while, but shook her head gently, and then responded very indifferently, I won't go shopping today, let's go home first, I have a few questions about cultivation that I want to ask you. Hearing this, Qinshi was suddenly happy, so he quickly went over and said politely, what's the relationship between the two of us, do you still need to use the word, ask? Qin Ruoying rolled her eyes at him and did not say anything. Seeing this, Qinshi did not feel offended at all, instead he happily reached out his hand to hail a taxi. After this period of time together, Qin Ruoying's attitude towards him had improved a lot. On one hand, it was because of the family's enthusiasm towards her. On the other hand, it was entirely because she gradually found many traces of her existence in her daily life. For example, the familiar feeling of walking in the alley, the flowers in the yard, and the photos in the phone, all of these things seemed to be saying, she was the mistress of this family. Therefore, Qin Ruoying's attitude towards Chen Shi gradually improved. Although she had not recalled any memories of the past, at least she had regained the feeling of cultivation under the reminder of her sister-in-law. In addition, it seemed that only when she was cultivating she could faintly find the intimate feeling that she had with Chen Shi. The many changes in Qin Ruoying were naturally seen by Chen Shi. Therefore, every time he thought of this problem, he could not help but feel a burst of joy in his heart. If it continued to develop at this rate, wouldn't it not be long before he could climb into Yingying's bed again? They didn't wander around today, so when the couple returned to the Sai courtyard, it was only 9 in the morning. As soon as Chen Shi pushed open the door, the sound of punches and kicks could be heard from the courtyard. It was his sister-in-law and her 2 punching bags. After this period of actual combat, Cheng Hua and Yi Ji's martial arts had greatly improved. When the 2 of them joined forces, they could even easily survive 200 to 300 rounds against Qin Xueqing. Chen Shi didn't want to disturb them. After nodding slightly to his sister-in-law, he followed Qin Ruoying to the west wing. However, although Chen Shi didn't intend to interrupt them, Cheng Hua directly jumped out of the battle circle the moment he appeared, then quickly came in front of him and said hurriedly, "Mr. Chen, thank you for taking care of me during this period of time. I thank you in advance." Hearing this, Chen Shi had to temporarily stop his footsteps. He glanced at Qin Ruoying's back, then glanced at Cheng Hua's anxious face. In the end, he could only let out a long sigh, then asked impatiently, "What's the matter?" It was no wonder that Chen Shi's attitude was so bad. After all, he could only step into the west wing every day at this time. Being delayed by Cheng Hua like this directly affected the time he had to chat with Yingying and cultivate their relationship. Cheng Hua was shocked by Chen Shi's bad attitude. But after being stunned for a moment, he seemed to have mustered up some courage. He quickly lowered his head and cupped his fist to Chen Shi and said loudly, "I have been away from home for a long time. Next month is my mother's birthday. On such an important day, I hope you will allow me to go home and visit my mother. I understand. I am a sinner. Whether I live or die depends on your whims. My request may seem rude, but please allow me to return home for 3 days to fulfill my filial piety, sir. If you are worried, I can make a vow here that I will come back as soon as possible. If I disobey, Shenyuan Cheng Hua is willing to be struck by lightning and not enter the cycle of reincarnation after death." Perhaps he was afraid that Chen Shi wouldn't agree, so Cheng Hua spilled the beans like a bamboo tube, spilling everything he wanted to say. After speaking, this kid was like a child who had done something wrong. He tilted his head and peeked at Chen Shi eagerly. "It is your mother's 100th birthday, so you want to go home to fulfill your filial piety?" Hearing this, Chen Shi did not immediately respond. Instead, he looked at his sister-in-law thoughtfully. Although he had caught this kid with his own hands, he had already handed them over to his sister-in-law to deal with. Looking at this posture, this kid seemed to have calculated that he was easier to talk to than Qin Xueqing. So he did not even ask for Qin Xueqing's opinion and directly came to ask for his approval. Chen Shi did not speak, but Cheng Hua was a little anxious. So, he immediately knelt on the ground, bowed and shouted, "I hope you will allow me to go home on account of my filial piety. If not, I would rather commit suicide on the spot than live an ignoble life in this world." Cheng Hua's words were powerful and resonating. After hearing this, Chen Shi laughed. "Oh, are you threatening me?" After hearing Chen Shi's words, Cheng Hua's heart suddenly jumped. He suddenly remembered Chen Shi's character. Oh no. Mr. Chen was always amenable to coaxing but not coercion. He had to change his method of asking him. Thinking of this, Cheng Hua immediately changed his strategy. Instead, he looked at Chen Shi with grief and indignation. At the same time, he looked at Chen Shi with a pitiful expression. Seeing that this kid had stopped talking and was looking at him so pitifully, Chen Shi was too lazy to tease him anymore. So, he directly asked Qin Xueqing, "Since the 2 of them are under your care, how do you think we should deal with this matter?" Hearing this, before Qin Xueqing could speak, a trace of despair flashed across Cheng Hua's face. They had known each other for so long. Chen Shi would invite the 2 of them to sit down and eat together when he had nothing to do. But what about Qin Xueqing? Every day she would beat them up violently. She had never been kind to them. Therefore, the moment he heard Chen Shi ask for Qin Xueqing's opinion, Cheng Hua's heart had already lost all hope. But what Cheng Hua did not expect was, Qin Xueqing's answer was 10,000 times better than he had imagined. "Everyone has parents. Since he is so filial, this request is not too much. But the 2 of you remember, this trip can't be delayed for too long. I heard that it takes 4 days to go back and forth from Earth to the Supreme Palace enclosure. In that case, I'll give the two of you 7 days off. If I don't see the two of you back after 7 days, I think the two of you should know very well what the consequences will be." After speaking, Qin Shuiqing walked to the east wing without looking back. Only the two of them were left standing there in a daze. She agreed just like that. Cheng-Hua was in a daze. Yi blinked and could not help but wonder if he had heard wrongly. It was not his mother's birthday. He did not expect that he could actually go home with Cheng-Hua to visit his family. Qin Shuiqing actually agreed. Seeing the two of them looking as if they had seen a ghost, she could not help but smile. Then he turned around and walked into the west wing. If Cheng-Hua and Yi were to be seen as students, then Qin Shuiqing was obviously their class teacher whom they feared like a tiger. Mischievous bad children were never liked by teachers. The two of them knew their place. Therefore, if they were to ask their class teacher to sign a leave of absence, they would rather forge a leave of absence than step into their class teacher's office. This was the general prejudice that bad children had against their class teacher. In fact, why would a class teacher discriminate against every child in her class? Therefore, even though her sister-in-law beat the two of them up every day, actually she was very warm in her heart. Chapter 504. After getting Qin Shi and Qin Shuiqing's approval, Cheng-Hua and Yi could finally leave this planet that made them feel sad at this moment. Although Qin Shi did not leave any restrictions on them, the two of them were tactful, so they did not even think of using this opportunity to escape from Qin Shuiqing's evil clutches. The two of them seemed to have already accepted their fate. Even Cheng-Hua, who had always had a fiery temper, did not have any intention of encouraging Yi to escape after regaining control of the cloud-piercing shuttle at this moment. Instead, he looked back at the Azure planet with some reluctance. As expected of a great figure in the Supreme Realm. Such breadth of mind and boldness, you are really a role model for our generation. Yi did not notice the strange look on Cheng-Hua's face. Perhaps to relieve the depressing atmosphere on the ship, Yi stood at the stern of the ship and sighed with emotion. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he could not help but tease with a smile. "Cheng-Hua, let's hide in the heavenly market enclosure, shall we?" Cheng-Hua did not reply. Seeing this, Yi was like a demon tempting people to fall into depravity. He moved closer to Cheng-Hua and continued to bewitch him. "How about the purple myrtle enclosure?" The three enclosures are like 3 wooden rafts floating in the vast void. Although their whereabouts are uncertain and difficult to find, they converge once every 100 years. I heard my father mention it before we set off. The next time the 3 enclosures converge should be within the next 10 years. You see, when the time comes, we only need to hide in the heavenly market enclosure or the purple myrtle enclosure. So what if Mr. Qin is a supreme realm cultivator? Could it be that he can turn the 3 enclosures upside down and be determined to find us? Yi kept bewitching Cheng-Hua. If it was the old Cheng-Hua, he might have been persuaded by him and jumped up to hide in the heavenly market enclosure. But unfortunately, after experiencing Qin Shuiqing's constant hardships, Cheng-Hua's temperament had been restrained a lot. Therefore, after hearing Yi's incessant chatter, Cheng-Hua immediately slapped him in annoyance, and then scolded him with a smile on his face. "Do you really take me for a fool? If you want to go, then go. What's the use of telling me this? I'm the one who swore to Mr. Chen, not you. What are you afraid of?" After hearing Cheng-Hua say this, Yi immediately felt relieved. The reason why he tried to bewitch Cheng-Hua was because he was afraid that Cheng-Hua would act without thinking like before. As the saying goes, a fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. Yi was very pleased with Cheng-Hua's change, so he sat next to him with a smile, and then chatted with him casually. "Cheng-Hua, I don't know what you're thinking, but I think it's actually pretty good for us to stay here. Although we're controlled by others and are punched and kicked by that evil woman every day like a slave. But if we think about it from another perspective, the two of us seem to have learned a lot from it. What's more, Mr. Qin is still in the supreme stage. Even if it's just a simple sentence or two, it will be of great benefit to our future cultivation, so..." At this point Yi deliberately paused and then said with a determined face, "After 7 days I will definitely be back here." After hearing Yi's words, Cheng-Hua seemed to be a little dispirited and didn't seem to be interested in paying attention to him at all. Yi felt that Cheng-Hua's behavior was a little strange today, so he couldn't help but push him and then asked with a puzzled face, "What's wrong with you? Aren't you happy to be home?" Hearing this, Cheng-Hua shook his head and then muttered in a very strange tone, "Don't mess around, I'm thinking about a very serious problem." "What problem?" "I'm thinking about whether Nian will like the taste of the dragon saliva fruit." You see, it's rare for the two of us to go home. We should take this opportunity to bring some gifts back for Nian Nian, right? But I thought about it and I didn't think of what to bring her. Think about it yourself. What does Nian Nian usually treat us to? Chocolate, biscuits, jelly, French fries, yogurt. These are all delicacies in the world. As a return gift, we can't take out something too shabby, right? After hearing Changhua say this, Yiji couldn't help but be stunned. Right. I actually forgot such an important thing. Come, let's quickly think about what gifts we should bring for Nian Nian. Time flew like an arrow and the sun and moon flew like a shuttle. In the blink of an eye, a month's time passed. During this time, the adults were busy cultivating in seclusion all day long, and because the little girl skipped a grade, she needed to spend more time reviewing her homework every day. Everyone was busy with their own things and the courtyard was much quieter because of this. As time passed, although Qin Shueqing didn't have any clear expression, the expression on her face was so gloomy that it seemed like water was about to drip out. They clearly agreed on 7 days and a month had already passed, but Changhua and Yiji still hadn't returned to Earth. Were these two brats playing with her like a monkey? As soon as she thought of this problem, Qin Shueqing's towering chest couldn't help but begin to rise and fall rapidly. After enduring for a full month, she couldn't bear it anymore. Therefore, Qin Shueqing found Qin Shi and wanted to borrow a xingqia from him. Do you still have a xingqia? Lend it to me. Hearing this, Qin Shi raised his eyebrows and asked, What do you want to do? Find someone. I want to see, can they hide to the ends of the earth? Seeing Qin Shueqing gnashing her teeth in anger, Qin Shi suddenly laughed. I think they might be delayed by something? Don't worry, it's only been a month. Wait a little longer, there's no rush. How about this, if they don't come back by next month? I'll find time to go to Supreme Palace enclosure again, and I'll definitely catch the two of them for you, okay? After hearing Qin Shi's promise, Qin Shueqing finally withdrew the idea of going to Supreme Palace enclosure. Then, like an inflated blowfish, she angrily returned to the East Wing room. It couldn't be helped, his sister-in-law's temper was just that bad. If Qin Shi really gave her a xingqia, she would probably immediately go to Supreme Palace enclosure to find Changhua and Yiji to reason with them. His sister-in-law was furious, but Qin Shi didn't seem to care too much. This was because he believed that Changhua and Yiji would never dare to trick him. After all, the name Mr. Qin? Now, even if it was at Supreme Palace enclosure, it could be considered a golden signboard. Come. Wonderful book house. Come. Chapter 505. Qin Shi was certain that Changhua and Yiji would come back, so he didn't take this matter to heart for the time being. Next, let's talk about the little girl first. After a month of adaptation, the little girl had successfully integrated into the new class. Although she was a year younger than her classmates, they didn't dare to look down on her. On one hand, it was because Nian Nian's usual performance was very good, so the teachers liked her very much. On the other hand, it was entirely because of her results in this monthly exam. In Wuxia's education system, academic results were the only standard to measure a child's quality. Although the little girl skipped a grade, her results in this monthly exam still easily took first place in her grade. Therefore, when the teacher announced the results, the whole class was shocked. Wasn't this the other family's child that parents often talked about? The teacher also said before that after the monthly exam, the class monitor would be selected based on everyone's performance. And in this so-called comprehensive performance, wasn't the exam results the most important indicator? The teachers didn't like children who were unreasonable. Those children who were obedient and sensible, but their grades weren't good enough to convince the masses. Nian Nian's performance and results were very good, plus she was the class monitor in the first grade class, so what reason did the teacher have to not let her be the class monitor? Outstanding children would always be singled out as an example. Therefore, this little girl who had just skipped a grade and entered the third grade, after a monthly exam, her name had already spread throughout the entire grade. On this day, as usual, after the little girl waved goodbye to Qin Shi, she quickly walked to the classroom and prepared to organize everyone to start the morning reading as the class monitor. This was the first task she received after becoming the class monitor, so she was especially attentive to it. As soon as she sat down, she couldn't wait to take out the language textbook from her bag and neatly placed it on the table. It wasn't time for class yet, so only half of the students were there, but the classroom was especially lively. Nian Nian looked back and saw that the most mischievous children in the class were chasing each other with brooms. Therefore, she immediately shouted to stop them, "Quiet! Class is about to begin." It was the class monitor's responsibility to maintain discipline. Now that she had become the class monitor, she naturally had to take on this responsibility. Following her outburst, the classroom suddenly became much quieter. Seeing this, the children who were chasing each other stopped and quickly returned to their seats. They were not afraid of Nian, but they were afraid that Nian would tell on them to the teacher. Nowadays, a class leader who doesn't snitch, is that still the class leader? If Nian's prestige in Year 1 Class 2 was earned through her fists, then her prestige in Year 3 Class 2 was earned through her own outstanding performance. Was the third year. No matter how late a child matured, he should be more sensible by now. Teacher Zhang stepped into the classroom just as the bell rang. Looking at the silent classroom, Teacher Zhang couldn't help but nod his head in satisfaction. Then, he gestured for Nian to come to the podium and lead everyone to start the morning reading. The text for today's morning reading was Jianghu Bridge. It was a simplified version with pinyin annotations. The whole text was less than 500 words. After Nian led the students to read the text twice, the teacher nodded his head in satisfaction and officially began the day's lesson. There were a total of 46 students in their class. It wasn't a large number, so the desks and chairs were all a single set and not a two-person set. After Nian returned to her seat, she took out the textbooks and put them in her drawer as usual. At this moment, she suddenly realized, he didn't know when this strange thing appeared in his drawer. Nian took out the thing and saw that it was a letter folded into the shape of a heart. The style of the letter was very exquisite, and it even had a faint fragrance. It was obvious that this was the most popular letter paper in the school's canteen. There was a name written on the heart-shaped letter. It was Chen Yan. Nian frowned and opened it. The first thing she saw was a few lines of crooked, worm-like love messages. To Chen Yan, I like you. My love for you is very deep as a bottomless pit. I don't look good, but I'm a good person. I'll give you a gift right away. Can you tell me your QQ? And where is your home? My body won't go with you, but my heart will go anywhere with you. Moi heart, 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 heart. Of course, this was the translated version. There were many wrong words in the original text. The child who wrote this didn't seem to know how to write love. After writing it wrong several times, he directly drew a lot of hearts on it. This was a love letter? Nian expressionlessly read the contents of the letter. Then, as if nothing had happened, she directly tore the letter that carried the strong love of others into pieces. No one, including the teacher, noticed anything strange about her. She was silent like this, as if she suddenly had something on her mind. In fact, Nian already knew what a love letter was and what it meant. But she never thought that one day she would also be the one to receive a love letter. Then there was a problem. When faced with such a situation, what should she do? Should she tell the teacher or should she tell her father? It was probably because the writer had forgotten to sign the letter, so she didn't even know who wrote this strange love letter. What should she do? What should she do? The little girl had something on her mind, so she was obviously a little muddle-headed for the rest of the day. Finally, the crisp and melodious school bell rang. After the teacher assigned the homework for the day, the little girl uncharacteristically rushed out of the classroom with her bag. She ran as fast as she could. Soon she ran to the school gate. Then, through the school gate, she saw her father standing in the crowd and waving at her. Unlike the teacher, she almost instantly noticed the strangeness on the little girl's face. So, he immediately walked out of the crowd and squatted on the ground, smiling and motioning her to come out. Dad. As if she had suffered a great grievance, the little girl ran out of the school gate and threw herself into Chen Shi's arms. Seeing this, Chen Shi's eyebrows suddenly twisted. Nian, what's wrong? Were you bullied at school? Don't be afraid, tell Dad what happened, Dad will help you. When I was writing, I suddenly thought of a song. Let me recommend Love Letter by Jackie Chungo. Unfortunately, love is not a few drops of tears or a few love letters. This may be a little cruel. People who wait for others to give them happiness often don't live happily. However, just as Shi was about to reprimand her, the little girl seemed to have suddenly thought of something and replied calmly, I tore up the letter. Torn? Shi was stunned. Then he took the little girl into his arms and laughed excitedly, My youngest daughter is sensible. Well done. Well done. MD. He had long heard that children nowadays were very mature. But he also did not expect To think that children nowadays would mature to such an extent. Nian was only a little over 7 years old. Although she had skipped a grade and her classmates were generally 1 or 2 years older than her, they were still only 8 or 9 years old children. Don't you want to watch cartoons anymore? Not playing Mobile Legends? Actually had the leisure to come and flirt with his daughter? Fortunately, Nian did not let him down. If it were not for the many parents at the school gate, Qin was afraid that he would be so excited that he would shout to the sky, "Well done!" Qin was very satisfied with the little fellow's way of dealing with it. But on second thought he could not help but feel a little worried. After all, the problem of puppy love was more serious than being unable to adapt to skipping a grade. Looking at the cute little girl in front of him, Qin could not help but feel a little lost. How should he put it? In Qin's eyes, Nian was simply a child who did not even show any gender characteristics. Children were children. Children were not differentiated by gender. But now, someone had actually started to write a love letter to Nian. Although Nian tore the letter, this could only treat the symptoms and not the root cause. In fact, Qin was very clear in his heart, as the child continued to grow up, Nian's charm would only increase. Just like Ying in the past, the grown-up Nian only needed to stand there and it should be enough to attract the attention of all the opposite sex nearby. Now that the first love letter had appeared, there would definitely be a second one, a third one, and even countless of them. Then there was a problem. As a parent, what should he do? Even when he was besieged by the 4 immortals, Qin was not so nervous. He frowned tightly and kept telling himself not to think too much, but he still could not help but think of the worst. Some things, the more he thought about it, the more terrifying it was. Qin frowned and didn't say anything. The little girl waited for a long time. After seeing that her father was still frowning, she tilted her head slightly and pondered. She was a very smart child and naturally knew what her father was worried about. Therefore, after hesitating for a moment, Nian took the initiative to hug Qin's neck and said softly, "Dad, don't worry, I won't fall in love at a young age." Qin subconsciously swallowed her saliva. He was still hesitating on how to bring it up, but he did not expect the little girl to take the initiative to mention this issue. A child who was just over 7 years old actually discussed the topic of puppy love with her parents. Such a scene, just thinking about it, would feel a little awkward and strange. Nian, do you know what puppy love means? I know there used to be a lot of people in our class who fell in love at a young age, but I didn't tell the teacher. Really? Qin was shocked. Obviously, the class that the little girl mentioned was the first year, second class. A first-year child learned how to fall in love. What was going on with this world? It had to be said that Qin's worldview was greatly impacted. But on second thought he was a little relieved. The situation should not be as serious as he thought. After all, the information on the internet was too advanced now. The amount of information that children could obtain was far more than children in the 80s and 90s. Naturally, they would know more than children in the 80s and 90s. Falling in love was a popular word at the moment. Children were very curious, so naturally they would learn this slightly novel way of getting along with each other from various channels. Coupled with the special nature of the school environment, it was not surprising that there were many young couples in a class under the vicious influence of spreading rumors. Time is always relative. Now let's rewind time to 1 month ago. After a period of hurrying, Jianghu and Yi successfully arrived at the Supreme Palace enclosure on the 3rd day after they set off. Qin didn't have the habit of showing off in front of children, so the two of them didn't know that Qin had caused a ruckus in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven. They also didn't know that the Tuoba family had suffered heavy losses because of it. As the instigators of all this, the two brats only had the chance to visit home after leaving home for almost a year. Thus, just as the cloud-piercing shuttle flew into the sky above Ning province, Yi couldn't contain his excitement anymore. He jumped off the cloud-piercing shuttle and flew as fast as he could to the Dongfang family. He had already discussed with Jianghu beforehand. Everyone would go back to their own families and find their mothers. 3 days later they would meet here and head back to Earth together. The 3 great families of Ning province were the Shenyuan family, the Dongfang family, and the Tuoba family. In terms of status, the two of them actually had very high positions in their families. But it was also because of this that the pressure they faced far exceeded that of their peers. Jianghu could be used as an example. His father was Genrio, one of the 8 great elders of the Shenyuan family. Since he was one of the 8 great elders of the Shenyuan family, Genrio's cultivation naturally wouldn't be weak. In reality, Genryo, who was in the early stage of soul formation, was already more than 800 years old. Immortal cultivators had long lifespans, but when it came to bearing children, they were far inferior to mortals. As the saying goes, the unseen world has its own will. Under the influence of the laws of heaven and earth, the higher one's cultivation, the lower their chances of bearing children. Genryo had 9 sons and 4 daughters in his life. Chunghua was Genryo's youngest child, and at the same time his last child. Chunghua's talent wasn't bad. In addition, Genryo had a child at an old age, so it was inevitable that he would especially spoil this youngest child. Logically speaking, Chunghua should have lived a very comfortable life since he was born in one of the 3 great families of Ning province and his father was one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family. After all, he was a rich second generation. But it was a pity. Reality was always slightly different from what outsiders imagined. In reality, Chunghua's life wasn't good at all. Chunghua's mother was called Jianghu, and she came from a small family in Ning province. Because of her outstanding appearance, Genryo made an exception and took her in as a concubine. What needed to be understood here was how long a cultivator's life was. After a deep sigh, Genryo could only silently turn around and leave. In order to not let anyone disturb Jianghu, Genryo didn't forget to remind the servants not to let anyone take half a step into the courtyard after leaving. Now he could only hope that Jianghu could walk out of this shadow as soon as possible. After all, Genryo had lived for several hundred years and was already used to seeing life and death. Therefore, when he learned that Chunghua might never come back, he didn't appear too sad or emotional. It was impossible to say that he wasn't sad. But what was the use of being sad? As an immortal cultivator, Genryo had experienced too many life and death separations in his life. That old heart of his had long been numb. But it was precisely because his heart had long been numb that Genryo didn't know it all. This woman who had locked herself in her room all day because of the loss of her son, in such a state of despair, what terrible things would she do, in a dim room? Jianghu sat quietly by the bed alone, holding an old rag doll in her hand. This rag doll was personally sewn for Chunghua. It was also Chunghua's favorite toy when he was young. Perhaps she was thinking of him when she saw it. Jianghu gently stroked the rag doll with her fingers as she softly muttered, Don't worry. Mother has already reached an agreement with the Holy Church. Very soon they will let Big Brother accompany you to the Tianshu ruins." Her voice was very soft, but the expression on her face was very strange. Sometimes she chuckled, sometimes she was sad. As if she was possessed, it gave people a horrifying and strange feeling. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor. Before Genryo could even open his mouth to reply, he rushed into the main hall as if he had been electrocuted. Then, in front of the master, he shouted at everyone, "No!" Let me ask you the simplest question. Didn't you have a ninth grade spirit treasure previously? If the current you with your bare hands were to face the you who used to have a ninth grade spirit treasure, then do you think, which period would you be more powerful? With that, she smiled mysteriously and patted Chenghua's shoulder. This scene also left a deep impression on Chenghua. Actually, this thing is just like dating. The one that suits you is the best. Though the Phoenix Perch Scorchtail box is good, it does not suit you. Also, if you rely too much on external forces, other than being able to kill a few more people, it does not help your cultivation at all. So, before you truly find a Dharma treasure that suits you, I suggest that you be yourself first. After Shi's advice, Chenghua finally understood. This sword, it was both in his hand and in his heart. When he did not have a sword in his hand, it was time for him to take out the sword in his heart. No magic treasures. After hearing Chenghua's words, the elder's eyes flashed with joy. One had to know that the competition schedule of the clan gathering was very tight. The competition was basically one after another. There was not enough time to rest and recuperate. If he went through a fierce battle right after he appeared, then even if he could successfully enter the final round, his performance would be greatly reduced. And if he could obtain victory at the lowest cost and then face opponents of the same level in his peak state, his chances of winning would naturally increase by 30%. To the elder, the clan gathering was the only chance for him to make a comeback. Therefore, just as Chenghua finished speaking, the elder pretended to be in a difficult position and replied, "Since young master is so confident, I can only accept your favor. Young master, be careful. I am about to make my move. This move is called Wave Fanyun. Please enlighten me, young master." Even though the old man was calling himself a young master, the long saber in his hand danced with vigor and vigor. Although this move was called Wave Fanyun, it had nothing to do with water. As he waved the long saber in his hand, a streak of fire covered half of the arena like a cloud in the evening. This brat. How can he be so careless? In midair, seeing the elder attack with all his might, Genryo was so angry that he trembled. Middle stage golden elixir against peak stage golden elixir. His opponent had clearly allowed him to make the first move, but Chenghua insisted on being careless. Not only did he not use his Dharma treasure, he even allowed the elder to make the first move. What was this if not courting death? If not for the clan leader beside him, Genryo would have even appeared and reprimanded Chenghua. Genryo was extremely anxious, but the clan leader was extremely calm.